to Stewardship Council on Thursday, August 24th, 2017 to order and begin with the roll call.
Johnston here. Emerald here.
Weinberg here.
Tatayan here.
Fiorini here.
Thompson here.
We have a quorum. Next item, we are going to recess to closed executive session. For those of you that are following on the web, it is now just a few minutes after 9. I expect that we could be back as early as 10 o'clock. So tune back in on or around 10 o'clock and we should be back in open session at that time. So we're now in recessing to closed session. Good morning. I'd like to reconvene now in open session. I have nothing to report from closed session. We'll pick it up with file item number 5, adoption of the July 27th, 2017 meeting. Summary.
I'll move it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Second.
Thompson seconds. Thompson moves. Weinberg seconds. Any discussion? We shall vote.
Weinberg, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
Thompson, aye.
Motion passes. On to file item number 6. Just one note, I think you've probably all heard that the deadline was last Tuesday for submissions for Prop 1 storage funds, and the commission has received 12 applications. So that process is underway. Good progress now on the storage front. 2 of our council members attended a conference in Southern California. This would probably be a good time, Ken and Skip, to report to us what you observed. And tell us a little bit about the purpose of the
Sure.
conference.
This was the Urban Water Institute, which is a organization, kind of a water supply organization made up of mostly Southern Californians, but they have increasingly got more participation in Northern California. So I was there, and I was there just as a attendee, but Skip was on a panel, and he can talk about that. So there were a couple of discussions that were Delta related, and they had an interesting discussion, good attendance, a lot of water managers, a lot of water board people, board members, and policymakers. So they had an interesting focus on Lake Oroville, sort of what's happening with the emergency repairs, and then more of a public policy discussion about how to pay for continued maintenance or improvements, and really kind of looking at the beneficiaries' pay approach. They tried to get a discussion on that, and they had the executive director of the contractors and the GM of Met and someone from DWR talking about it, and they were looking at a multi-beneficiary approach to Oroville. And so I asked a question. I reminded them, hey, we're doing this levy investment strategy, and that's, you know, what do you think in terms of that type of an approach? And didn't get a lot of reception from the water people, but I think there was acknowledgement that it's a very similar issue, that there's more than one beneficiary of levy improvements or levy stability. And so hopefully, you know, that seemed like a good discussion point to get out in front of people. The other panel was about the Water Quality Control Plan, and I spoke to Randy about this, the chair, and there was a lot of, this is another panel, and they talked about the salmon recovery plan, and they were talking about all the things that we talk about as part of the science program, adaptive management and the need to, look at how do you restore the food web and the role of habitat and all of those kind of things, which was really, it was very good to hear. And they also talked about the Independent Science Board and how important that's been in salmon recovery and some of these other issues. And, it seemed like what we were hearing was sort of, yeah, there's this means to control things based on flow, but then what we've also talked about is ecosystem improvement really requires more than just flow-based actions. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, it seemed like that's a topic that came up as we were doing the CSO amendment, and I think this panel was general manager from one of the water agencies north of Sacramento, an attorney who represents a couple of the irrigation districts and the Metropolitan Water District water resource manager, and it just seemed like a good discussion for the council to hear, and kind of get us up to date. And I know that we submitted a letter on the environmental document that the state board prepared and made some of these same points, but it was good to hear such a robust discussion, and also to hear that the state board was looking for ways, proposals on how you incorporate these other measures. So I thought that was a good discussion, and gratifying to hear that the things we're talking about are being talked about more widespread. And then, unfortunately, I didn't make Skip's. I had a panel, but I had a previous appointment, so I'm looking forward to hearing your report.
Very quickly, thanks, Ken. My panel, it was described as the Delta on the precipice. And on the panel was Jeff Keitlinger from Met, Pierce Swan from Irvine Ranch, Michael George from our water master, myself, John Herrick from, I think he's South Delta. And it was, and I guess I was the guy with the message that maybe some of them didn't want to hear. And our focus, or at least my focus, was the cost-benefit analysis that was just released, or soon to be released, by Dr. Jeffrey Michael from UOP. And I talked about that, but I think I also talked about what the Delta is. Delta as a place, which, some of the folks in Southern California, I think they don't even know where the Delta is. They just know they get water out of it, and that's okay. And, Pierce Swan and I had a lively discussion, because he felt it wasn't my role to come down to Southern California and tell them whether or not they could afford the twin tunnels. And I said, well, I'm here because I was invited, so I'm going to share with you my thoughts. And, so it was a good discussion. I think I was able to get my points out there. And, my response to Pierce Swan was, I'm not here to tell you whether you can afford it. I'm just telling you that there are other ways of using $16 billion. And I laid it out based on, Dr. Jeffrey Michael's recent analysis. So I think we got our points across. Whether it was received well, it was really of no concern of mine. It was trying to have this discussion, and we certainly did. So I thought it was a great opportunity for myself as a representative of the Delta Counties Coalition to talk about something that they may not have been wanting to talk about. So anyway, it was a good discussion. I appreciated being there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, that concludes the chair's report. No requests for public comments, so on to file item number 7, the executive officer's report. Jessica?
Thank you. Good morning. Last week, I was invited to appear before the California Water Commission at their meeting in the Bay Area. The focus of the meeting was on the Delta, and I was one of a number of speakers invited to help them understand how their work and pending decisions about storage matter to the Delta, as well as to talk about the Delta Plan and the role of the council and our recent work to amend the Delta Plan. The Bond Act, Prop 1, that gave the Water Commission $2.7 billion to invest in storage projects, also required the commission and project proponents to include measurable benefits to the Delta ecosystem as a requirement for funding. And in fact, the law reads that Chapter 8, which is the storage chapter in the bond, funding will not be allocated to a project unless it is determined that at least 50% of the total public benefits funded for the project are ecosystem improvements. A project may only receive funding if it provides measurable improvements to the Delta ecosystem or to tributaries to the Delta. And those ecosystem improvements include changing the timing of water diversions, improvements in flow conditions, temperature, and other measurable improvements that help restore aquatic ecosystems and native fish and wildlife species. So the resulting regulations that have been developed by the Commission through their Water Supply Investment Program, WSIP, which I learned they pronounce WISP, fairly well align with the objectives of our Delta Plan. And it's not an accident. We work closely with the Water Commission staff and they with us on our CSO draft amendment. Both of those, I think, reflect and build upon the recognition in the Delta Reform Act that in order to make progress in California's water management, even when considering projects that might be 100 miles upstream or downstream, we must address the Delta. August 14th, as Randy mentioned, was the deadline for their funding applications, and the Commission hopes to make funding decisions around the spring of 2018. The Water Board, State Water Resources Control Board, earlier this month announced that Eileen Sobek would be its next executive director, succeeding Tom Howard, who retired in May. I've had a chance to meet Eileen, and I look forward to working with her. She's new to state government, but spent her career in federal agencies that touch upon many of the same public resource challenges that both the Council and the Water Board face. She spent the last 3 years overseeing NOAA Fisheries as the Assistant Administrator at the Department of Commerce, and before that she was the Department of Interior's Acting Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs, and also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. She's a lawyer by training and profession as well, and we look forward to interacting with Ms. Sobek on a variety of Delta matters. Also in personnel for the Council, we welcome Gabrielle Boisrame, who is joining the science program this week. Gabrielle has a PhD in environmental engineering with an emphasis in hydrology and an undergraduate degree in applied mathematics with a minor in chemistry. She has expertise relating to hydrology, climate change, and water quality through her coursework and research experience, and one of her jobs included working for the Contra Costa Water District on projects which gave her experience with water management, environmental regulations, reservoir operations, and modeling. So she'll be focusing here on a range of projects, including the science that supports water supply reliability. And so I'd like to welcome Gabrielle. With that, I'll move to Bethany Payne for our legal update.
Thank you, Jessica. Andrew Tariainen has an update for the Council on latest developments on water fix.
Thank you, Chair Fiorini and members of the Council. Just a one-item legal update this month on the lawsuits on the Department of Water Resources certification of the Water Fix EIR. If you'll recall from our last update, the certification happened on July 21st, which made the deadline for lawsuits challenging the EIR August 21st. At current count, we're aware of 17 separate lawsuits involving 59 petitioners. That may be missing one or two lawsuits I just haven't tracked down yet. 15 of the suits are in Sacramento County Superior Court, and then there's one each in San Joaquin and Alameda counties. All of the suits primarily involve CEQA claims, although a number of them also involve other claims such as the Public Trust Doctrine, the California Endangered Species Act, and various Delta-related statutes, including the Delta Reform Act. A few of them also include claims under the California Constitution, Article 10, Section 2, alleging waste and unreasonable use of water. We'll be reviewing the complaints and following the lawsuits, particularly as they relate to Delta Reform Act claims that might be relevant to the council. The next steps in the lawsuits will be to coordinate them before one judge, and there may well be motions to intervene from real parties in interest outside of the named petitioners so far. Even fast-tracked, CEQA lawsuits are supposed to be fast-tracked. Even so, given just the sheer volume of suits and petitioners involved, and that there are multiple counties involved, it's unlikely that whatever court ends up with this lawsuit or these suits will hear the merits for quite some time. It's speculation to guess exactly when, but probably late next year would be my guess at this point. Are there any questions? Thank you.
And as we have a chance to delve into,
I think we have a question.
I don't have a question. I guess just in the spirit of transparency, my county is one of the counties that's filed suit. So I just wanted to disclose, and I was one of the 5. It was a unanimous vote to file suit. So anyway, just want to make sure.
thank you. As we have a chance to delve into those suits, if they're, and as the cases progress, we'll be sure to keep you updated on them.
Okay, next, I'd like to invite up Ryan Stambrough for our legislative report. A few items, and including potential action item listed.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. I'll start off with a little bit of housekeeping in terms of the legislative calendar. August marks the home stretch for the first year of the legislative session. With both houses returning from summer recess earlier this week, the legislature is about 3 weeks out from an adjournment that will take us through the end of the year. In the time remaining, active bills such as the conservation measures I discussed last month, as well as Senator Monning's SB 623, which would remediate contaminated drinking water in disadvantaged communities through a series of fees, will have to advance out of their second house fiscal committees by the 1st of September, leaving floor session for the remaining 2 weeks thereafter. The vast majority of my presentation this morning is in response to the July council meeting and 2 specific requests from the council. The first relates to the current legislative policy for the council, and the second is a request for the body to consider taking a support position on Assembly Member Jim Frazier's AB 732 relating to the levy subventions program. Given the contrast between the 2 items, I would suggest to the council that we pause for discussion between the 2 items. Okay. So starting off with the current legislative policy for the council. It first developed in the spring of 2010. The current policy lays out a process and circumstances under which the council would go about taking a position on proposed legislation. To summarize, staff formally analyzes bills at the request of the administration, the council, or upon staff's own initiative. However, these analyses do not include a position unless previously endorsed by the council. In addition, the current policy includes what I would characterize as an ad hoc element that would occur under unique circumstances where a position would be timely and potentially influential to the policy outcome. While staff has not offered any modifications for council consideration today, revisions that clarify how the council could sponsor legislation or how specific bills could be brought to the council are aspects that the council could consider. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have on this item.
Questions for Ryan? Yes. Ken?
No, thank you, Ryan. It's a good report, and, you know, I feel like I've kind of raised some of this as an issue over several months, and you know, one thing that may help, and I guess my focus is not so much on taking a position, and the policy seems, you know, appropriate. It's worked for, you know, 7 years. It's more about that there are opportunities in legislation being advanced by others that advances the goals in the Delta Plan or helps us implement them or helps us, you know, understand or require accountability. And, I've kind of brought up the conservation bills, which I think there's two of them competing, the Friedman bill and Senator Hertzberg has got one. And it just seems, hey, here's an opportunity right now where we can talk about reduced reliance and sort of work our way in. And I'd like to be able to do that. And maybe one of the things we can do differently in the ledge report is really maybe separately highlight some of these bills that staff believes is a priority and is affecting things that we're working on right now, either now or, so some prioritization. And I think at the last meeting, we had a discussion and talked about the fact that Senator Johnston and Assemblymember Gatto are, their appointing authority is the legislature, and we're trying to implement the Delta Reform Act. And the chair works with all the state agencies on the implementation committee. At points in time, we could use some help from the legislature. And I think for me, the conservation legislation is really dealing with a fundamental issue for us and gets to not only conservation, but how they look at water recycling and regional self-reliance. And just to be able to get some language in a bill gives us something that we can point to and that the water agencies are going to have to follow anyway. And maybe there's ways that, if they're amending the Urban Water Management Planning Act, there's ways that we can make reporting easier for us, easier for them. So it's just wanting to be able to weigh in. And my understanding is we can do that, and I'd ask Senator Johnston, kind of as I don't want to say one of our legislative liaisons, but as someone appointed by the legislature, working with staff to try and get involved in the process. We had I think Assemblymember Gatto brought it up last time, is that being in the process and sort of being able to work with the authors of a bill or the stakeholders, or just being more proactive. And I think maybe if we highlight in the ledge report what we think are really I look at them as opportunities to forward the goals in the Delta Plan. And so that's kind of where I'm looking, how can we, as the council, support staff involvement in these processes, not create them or, be the main driver, but be a part of it and use that as another means to implement the Delta Plan. So in terms of taking positions, this, I don't have any real comments on the policy, but I think it fits with, there's some, I know we're going to talk about the Assemblymember Frazier's bill, so it kind of, that's something we're working on. Reduced reliance is something we're working on. Both of those things are undergoing CEQA review, and I think we should be more actively engaged in these processes and, on different levels, and really not, I think we're implementing what we've been mandated to implement by the legislature, and sometimes we need to go back there and say, hey, we need some help doing what you want us to do. So I'm going to stop and just say, hey, is there agreement, and how can we sort of get Ryan in the room, and is Senator Johnston and maybe Assemblymember Gatto, are they, what's your thoughts as sort of the legislature's appointees to the council on maybe selectively and getting involved in some of the bills as they move forward? So thank you for letting me go on about this.
Well, actually, thank you, Ken, for those thoughtful comments. I guess, and I said it last month, and I'll say it again, many folks, legislators, agencies look to this council for some direction. We have great staff, and we ought to be part of the process. We ought to be part of a helpful solution to bills that are introduced. And we're not working in a vacuum, and we shouldn't be. We should be participants, and we should work hard on bills that move our agenda forward. And, when 732 is discussed in detail. I'd like us to think about whether or not this is a bill that helps us achieve what we think are important parts of the Delta plan. And I say this, we're talking about dual conveyance. Dual conveyance, as we've discussed, just doesn't mean two tunnels. It means maybe a tunnel, maybe through Delta. And if we don't support the levees that are part of that through Delta process, then I think we're working against ourselves. So I'm looking forward to 732 discussion, and I certainly hope that the council supports it in its current version. So thank you.
Susan?
Thank you, Ryan, for this excellent report. And I agree with Ken, the policy is very clear, straightforward, it works. Can you give me some examples of how the council and our legislative representative have participated in the past on past bills?
Thank you for the question. There's a variety of ways. I would, the most natural distinction I would make is a formal kind of participation in terms of actually taking a position formally, going to the appropriate policy committees and fiscal committees, and actually testifying in support or in opposition, or conveying that position. That, to my knowledge, in my time here, has been a lesser utilized approach. The other approach is what I would consider more informal, which would be more from a technical assistance standpoint, which would be visiting with staff of bills that are of interest to the council, and increasing the awareness from the staff's perspective in terms of what's important to the council, and what particular priorities are, maybe what the Delta plan says or its associated regulations. This would also involve visiting with the policy and fiscal consultants as well, and any other staff in the building that may be relevant to the discussion. So typically, to sum up, I would say the vast majority of those interactions are much more on the informal basis rather than the actual formal basis that involves taking a position and conveying it that way.
And speaking as the council's former legislative director, during my time, I think we took a position on 2 or maybe 3 bills, I think probably 4 since the inception of the council, if that. And in almost all of those cases, it was where the bill attempted to either modify our authority directly as a council, or was seeking to directly implement something that we had opined on in the official adopted Delta plan, so where we already had clear guidance and unanimity on the council. Obviously, sometimes we're called upon to offer technical support by legislative staff or by other legislative staffers at state agencies. But really, I think what we've seen, the reality is while at the beginning of a session we may have a couple hundred bills that could potentially affect matters relating to the Delta, typically those that are most focused on the Delta don't end up going far enough for us to even consider taking a position on. So that's also kind of a reality of the matter. But I think that Ken's general guidance, which is that we use the Delta plan, as our beacon for where we weigh in or where we don't, is generally kind of how staff operates now, with the exception of the council occasionally shining a spotlight on a particular bill, and that's when we make a decision about formal approach or continuing an informal approach.
And I can offer up an example of that type of an approach with the Delta Heritage Area designation that's in the Delta Plan. We've worked consistently over the years to try and encourage Congress, along with the Delta Protection Commission, to move legislation forward at the federal level, unsuccessfully, but that's been something that Ryan has been working on consistently since he assumed his position here.
And I'm glad to hear that, Ken, at least you weighed in on this, and Susan, I think you did as well, that you think the current legislative policy generally works. I might suggest that given the recent increased interest from council members on potentially taking a position on a bill, that we might add a little bit of language that gives some guidance in terms of allowing us to post notification at a council meeting in advance or disclosure in advance when there's a particular bill that we're thinking about taking a position on, or some additional guidance in terms of how council members want to bring those issues to the table. Right now, the policy is largely silent on that.
So you've heard a suggestion. Any response to that?
That would be, oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
go ahead, yeah.
That would be helpful. I think, I can't remember if I've asked this before about whether the council has sort of ledge policy principles that guide staff in their discussion, or they, something that, I guess for me, it's more about how do we prioritize and focus our efforts in certain areas. And that's why one of my suggestions was, well, maybe we look at reorganizing the ledge report to highlight those bills that staff thinks is high priority, or seek some input from the council on, hey, where should we focus our efforts and get more involved in the process. So,
I think that's very doable, and I don't think we need to necessarily change something in our written policy
No,
related to that,
yeah.
but I think it's just helpful guidance to staff about how we orient the report.
Absolutely.
And as to the noticing, I think the more engagement we have from the public, the better. Because sometimes we sit up here in the dais and something said from the podium that kind of, oh yeah, we didn't think about that. So I think the more noticing, the more engagement with the public, the better. I don't see any downside.
Okay. In that case, we'll bring back some language at the next meeting for the council to consider and vote on.
Great. That's good. Thanks. Next.
Okay. And then moving on to our next item, AB 732 by Assemblymember Frazier. Given that this bill addresses a concept that I think this council is fairly familiar with at this point, I'll keep my remarks rather brief. AB 732, which currently sits on the suspense file in Senate Appropriations, would extend the maximum cost share sunset of 75% for the levy subventions program from July 1st, 2018 to July 1st, 2020. As the council will recall, the draft Delta Levies investment strategy, currently undergoing environmental review, endorsed a set of 3 recommendations aimed at modernizing the subventions program. In addition to making permanent the maximum cost share of 75%, there are 2 other elements that are adjusting the per mile deductible for inflation and simplifying the methodology for determining a reclamation district's ability to pay. In sum, the bill in its current form addresses in concept one of the 3 aforementioned council recommendations. And Mr. Chair, that concludes my introduction of that measure.
All right. Susan?
Ryan, I have a question, let's see here, on agenda item 7B. The page isn't numbered. It's right after the copy of the bill, Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Water, background and existing law, item 1. Who conducts the assessment of an agency's ability to pay?
Under current law, that requirement, that responsibility rests with the Department of Water Resources.
And is there any back and forth between the Reclamation District and the department as to the findings of the department's decision or assessment? Do they?
Typically, council member, up until this point, the practical application, as I understand it, in terms of how this has been applied, has been kind of a one-size-fits-all approach that takes the kind of the assessment or the temperature of the financial condition of the Delta Reclamation Districts as a whole, and then from there, it's provided across the board rather than in a per-applicant basis.
And that was part of our discussion, you may recall, probably maybe late last fall at this point in discussing our Delta Levy investment strategy. And at our last meeting, Skip referenced an ability to pay study that the Department of Water Resources had commissioned in terms of looking at a simplified approach, since they've, I think, concluded that the either current approach that's in law or that they've been using perhaps isn't as effective as it could be. We have asked the Department of Water Resources for a copy of that report, and we're still waiting on that request. But I don't think at this point, based on what I've heard about the report, that it's going to be as conclusive as we would like, which is why it's important to note that the MOU that we're going to sign with the Department of Water Resources and the Flood Board that we discussed at a previous meeting highlights figuring out this ability to pay issue as a priority among the three agencies. So at best right now, it's kind of pending.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the chair for at least putting this item on the agenda for discussion and possible action. You know, to your point of the ability to pay, you know, at the Delta Protection Commission, we started on an ability to pay or feasibility study, and it is not very easy to figure out how you collect all of those beneficiaries because of restrictions 218 and a number of other assessment restrictions. So we embarked on a feasibility study, but it's been bogged down with the reality that it's not as easy as one would think. But, you know, I wanted to just talk about 732, and then I see some of the folks in the audience that are here to talk to the bill itself. You know, as I mentioned earlier, 732 is nothing more than an extension for 2 years, a bill that we have heard many, many times here at the council that is very beneficial to those in the Delta. And no, the ability to pay it depends on who you are, whether you have high-value crops or if you're growing corn. And so the assessments have to recognize that the ability to pay is not that easy, but more importantly, the subvention fund has really done a great deal to shore up the levees that are so important, not only for moving water through the Delta, but protecting farmland, protecting public utilities. So this is an important bill, and I hope after we hear from the public that we'll have a discussion as to whether or not it is what we think it should be, whether the $1,000 a mile is appropriate, whether this ability to pay, which is not going to be an easy item or issue to resolve. I think we need to have that discussion. So I appreciate the chair putting it on the agenda for that. So thank you.
Anyone else? We have 3 requests for public comment, so I'll go to those. Erica Rodriguez from the Office of Assembly Member Frazier, welcome.
Good morning, Chair and members. My name is Erica Rodriguez, and I'm the District Director for State Assembly Member Jim Frazier.
We have to turn your microphone on.
Great.
There you go.
And thank you. And we wanted to thank the Council for consideration to endorse Assemblymember Frazier's AB 732. And as discussed, this bill does seek to extend the current 75-25 state and local cost share formula for the Delta Levees Maintenance Subvention Program for an additional 2 years. If the current formula is allowed to sunset on July 1st, 2018, the Levees Maintenance Subvention Program returns to the dark days of a 50-50 cost share that left many levees severely underfunded and poorly maintained. Before the 75-25 cost share for the levee maintenance was implemented, the levee breaches were far too common of an occurrence in our region. As the Delta Stewardship Council continues to work with other agencies to develop a coherent strategy for sustainable levee maintenance, we need to ensure that our levees are properly maintained in the meantime. AB 732 will ensure the necessary financing the Delta infrastructure needs for an additional 2 years, while the Delta Protection Commission and the Delta Stewardship Council determine new financing mechanisms for long-term maintenance. Until the investment strategies are ready, we need to continue the Delta Levy Maintenance Subvention Program, and your endorsement would be vital to ensuring there is no gap in proper funding. We thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next up, Gilbert Cozio, MBK Engineers.
Thank you, Chairman Fiorini and board members. My name is Gilbert Cozio with MBK Engineers. We represent 40% of the Delta Islands as engineering consultants. And I tend to watch this on the webcast, and I sit there yelling at the screen. And so I decided I'm going to show up to every one of these meetings just to say something, just to at least satisfy my. Yeah, at least I won't have to yell anymore because the people in the office are kind of wondering why I'm staring at my computer screen and yelling at it.
Gilbert, I can't picture you yelling.
Well, it's not as loud as some people like Chris Nudek, but it comes out. Again, thank you for considering the endorsement of AB 732. I've got a few comments, not necessarily totally relating to that, but just relating to the whole subject at hand. One, I kind of agree with Ken that in the future we're going to be working together on this. We're going to be implementing your Delta plans. You're going to be working with us because it's our levies that you're working with. And I think as we get there, you have to look at things like SB 34. What's worked over the years? And what happened with SB 34? The legislature passed the bill, and it had politics were involved, so some of the conditions were political, and we understood that. But then they passed it on to the Secretary of Resources to implement. And the Secretary assembled a group of stakeholders, and together we hashed out all the issues that were there. And as other issues came up, other legislation was drafted, kind of what Ken was referring to, that we've got to be able to have that ability to recognize, to implement this plan correctly, things may have to change. Like SB 34, it was passed in '88. By 1991, it was recognized that by the Planning and Conservation League, Jerry Merrill and whatnot, that the habitat portion and no net long-term loss of habitat wasn't quite as clear, so they wrote legislation to clear that up. And then in '96, after it was better handled as far as the no net long-term loss, we added an enhancement feature. So together we've worked on that to not only protect the Delta and the landowners by working on the levees, but also increasing the habitat. And what's never been captured in any of the processes that's gone on since then is what's been good about the program. I guess when I hear about changing things about the ability to pay and increasing the deductible, so to speak, what comes to mind is if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or at least look at what's been good about the program. And that's where I think it'd be nice if you and your consultants could really take a look, because some of the things we've seen that have come out of this group, like analyzing the finances, use bad data. And they didn't come to us and talk about what are the intricacies of trying to raise your assessments and that sort of thing. And I think Tom will talk some about the economics of farming, but there are a lot of things that really add complexity to the Delta in raising assessments. And to give you an example, not all levees and the area they protect are the same. And what I'm talking about is an island like Sutter that has 12.5 miles of levee only protects about 2,500 acres of farm ground. So you're talking about 200 acres per mile of levee. Where someone like Grand Island, their 29 miles of levee protect 550 acres per mile. So that a $50 per acre assessment on Grand Island generates a lot more money per mile than it does on Sutter. And some of those things just don't come out. Even though Sutter's probably got more high-value crops, they just can't generate the money because the levee system is very inefficient as far as protecting total acres. So that's some of the stuff that's come up in these ability to pay studies that they realize, it just gets too complex to really simplify. And that's where I kind of worry that a simplified plan just based on economics isn't going to work. I've seen some of the information that Arcadis has put together, just looking at straight economics. And to tell you the truth, some of the areas that they show as a high ability to pay really are some of the areas that have the least ability to pay. I think they're looking at elevation or something, and they're looking at grazing ground as maybe being able to plant vineyards. I don't know, but it hasn't really looked appropriate in my mind. So anyway, I guess as far as AB 32, I'd really ask for your endorsement because I think it'll show us that you guys are really planning to work together as we implement the Delta plan. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. You know, we did this with the Reclamation Board, and I think we can, you know, do this with you too as we go on, you know, working together and being able to look at all the stakeholders and then look at your Delta plan and then really figure out how do we implement it so that it betters, you know, everybody.
Gilbert, an opinion question. Why do you think the legislature asked us to develop a priority for state investment in Delta levees?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, you're looking at if you have a limited pot, where are you going to spend it? The problem is we don't have a plan. We don't really know, you know, if we went to a certain island, what is your plan? And that's the key to the ability to pay. If you're going to maintain the levee and it costs you $5,000 a mile, that's easy. If you're going to maintain your levee and it costs $40,000 a mile, that's harder. And if you have to rehabilitate your levee to get to whatever your plan is, that makes it even harder. So just looking at project by project isn't going to get it. You really have to look at the bigger picture, and that's where I think we've been asking your consultants to look at that, and that's not in their scope of work.
Can you determine some kind of a plan, or have you thought about a plan based upon ability to pay? I mean, is that something that is possible? You sound to me like it may be in Never Land.
Well, let me go back 10 years. So 10 years ago, M-Cubed, the same consultant that's working for the Stewardship Council, or Stewardship Protection Commission, did an ability to pay, and they kind of waded into it. They did the ability to pay on Bishop Tract, which was an urbanizing district, and Empire Tract, very close, just a few miles down the road, which is a totally ag district with a lot of grains growing, no permanent crops. And the reason they didn't expand beyond those two is they found, well, the urbanizing districts do have a great ability to pay. So they probably, at 25% cost share, they should be able to pick up more. But as far as Empire Tract, the plan they had to reach PL 99, they had less than a 2% chance, ability to pay. And so that's when they realized, you know, it's going to be a moot point to keep analyzing these agricultural islands because they have such a low ability to pay when you have plans to improve the levee system.
So it's your view that the state shouldn't even consider ability to pay based upon the impossibility of determining what really is a standard that we could follow?
Right. I think you have to look at individual islands and figure out what their plan is. And
So we can't, there's no state policy per se, in the sense that you can actually analyze and determine the ability to pay, except on an island-by-island basis. You understand my question?
yes. Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, Susan?
Thanks for educating us, Gil. In your experience, has DWR, after making this initial assessment on the agency's ability to pay, has there ever been any negotiation and a change caused by that negotiation?
No, like I said, the Empire Tract ability to pay study showed almost a zero ability for them to pay for long-term rehabilitation and maintenance of that system. And so it was determined it wasn't worth expanding the study to include all the other islands because they were going to end up pretty close to the same thing.
So how would you, in addition to ability to pay, and so I'm trying to think through, if I am DWR and I'm responsible for, I have a fiscal responsibility to the people of the state of California, and one of my tools is assessing the agency's ability to pay. But given the example you just described, how could I have another factor in making my, in completing my evaluation about how much to assist this reclamation district?
Well, I think you have a good example in the subventions program. So we have a $1,000 per mile deductible, and then after that, we get up to 75% reimbursed from the state. Now, if you, on the surface, that looks like, well, and it is a fantastic benefit to the landowners. But the question is, why don't they spend $100 million a year at that if it's 75% state money? And the answer is they have no ability to pay more than they can, and that's why we're kind of limited to between 12 and $15 million of state expenditure under that program, because that is the limit that they have to pay.
And what I'm asking is if in the future, we want to improve upon what we're doing, in addition to ability to pay and given our responsibility to prioritize funding, what other considerations should I be, analyzing in addition to ability to pay? So that, I'm imagining, because of our levy investment strategy, we have a prioritization. And then DWR has this program. And if I'm talking to a reclamation district and they say to me, well, don't just look at ability to pay, what other factors should I base my decision on to make an exception to the rule?
Well, I think both DWR and your programs are looking at who benefits from those levies. Now, the Stewardship Council, or Protection Commission, as Skip mentioned, is having a hard time figuring out how do you separate all those beneficiaries. Well, the fact that the state is picking up 75%, that's one way of saying, well, we know there's a lot of beneficiaries and the state's going to pick that up because they're all paying taxes and that sort of thing. So you can certainly prioritize by what they protect as far as water supply and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a tough puzzle.
Gil, thanks for helping us. Next up, Tom Zuckerman.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and Council.
Morning.
I want to chide you a little bit for getting a little off the subject. You're talking about things that really aren't a part of this bill. When you start talking about the whole levy improvement program, we're really talking about the maintenance program here, not some of these other subjects that you're delving off into. And I've been involved, from the outset of all these things, and I will tell you that without a doubt, the thing that we have the most pride in through the whole CalFed Stewardship Council thing and so forth is the progress we've made in improving our levees in the Delta. And recent history is adequate witness to that we, in the face of all these predictions of catastrophe and so forth, we've suffered at least 3 periods of historic high water in the Delta without losing any major of our levee systems. And it's because of basically the subventions program and then the special projects program, which is not a subject of this legislation, but is part of the whole thing. The reason we're here, I don't think there's any question that the legislature is going to pass this bill. They passed it before under Senator Wolk's guidance and so forth. The problem was that it got vetoed by the governor. And in the governor's veto message, what did he say the reason for that was? He said it was because of opposition or study or something that was going on at the Delta Protection Commission and the Delta Stewardship Council. So what we really want to do is to obviate that argument. I think that the subventions program is adequately supported in the Delta plan. Nobody's ever suggested that it's a bad program. You've raised some issue about the $1,000 per mile. The ability to pay thing is not part of this legislation. The $1,000 per mile is a subject that we've talked about here on various occasions, and there's an adequate reason not to want to disturb that, certainly for the next couple of years. Talk about cost of living, ability to pay, and so forth. If you go to look at the basic crop structure and the economics within the Delta over the past several years, we've seen a halving of the price for grain crops, particularly corn. Corn is a very important element in the agricultural production in the Central Delta area, not just for farming, but from an environmental standpoint. It supports the waste crop from the corn crop, and the grain crop supports the whole Pacific Flyway. And that's a very important thing. If you start tightening down the screws too hard on farming in the Delta, what do you see happens? You see vineyards coming in, you see orchards coming in and so forth, which have absolutely no value whatsoever for migratory waterfowl. So these are the kinds of things you should be keeping in mind at this point. Please support this bill. We work hard on it. For some reason, it's politically unpopular, probably because of the stances that we take on some of the other statewide water issues. But this has really been a great program. There's very little reason to criticize it, and there's a lot of reason to support it. And thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your efforts in supporting it here. I'd be happy to answer any of these questions that you may have. I may answer them a little bit differently than Gil, but we're all on the same side of this thing.
All right.
No questions?
Thank you, Tom.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Sure.
You know, I think what I've heard from Susan and some of the other council members is that there are a lot of things that we really don't know the answer to. And how are we going to get to a subvention program, a levee maintenance program that is really going to meet the needs of the Delta? I won't speak as eloquently, obviously, as the two that spoke as to why we should take a support position. But the point is this is a bill that is for 2 years, 2-year extension, and it gives us the time to come up with a plan, decide whether or not they're, waiting for DWR to finish their ability to pay research. And so I don't see any harm. Matter of fact, I see tremendous benefit. Tom spoke about what the Delta means and what the levees mean to the Delta. So I hope we could take a support position on this, because I think it is consistent with, if not all three certainly, but the 75-25, or as Randy reminded me, up to 75%. But the point is that, the deductible, that could be looked at and addressed with some thoughtful research as to what is the appropriate deductible amount. What is the ability to pay from those in the Delta that are actually using the Delta for farming? So I would hope that my colleagues would support the bill, and we could give Assemblyman Frazier the support he's looking for. Thank you.
Randy?
Yes, Patrick.
It's a three-legged stool. If you look at this bill in context, the legislature in 2009 gave us the Delta Reform Act, and among our charges in doing a Delta plan was to prioritize levee investments. So in 2013, the Delta plan was finished, and it in fact says that the priorities we set should be consistent with the provisions of the Delta Reform Act in promoting effective, prioritized, strategic state investment. And in doing that, and in 2017, we came up on the money part with three things that we focused on. And one was the 75% cost share up to that amount, right, the state share. And the other was updating the deductible, which first appeared in law in 1996 and has been renewed for some time since then. So the third one was simplifying how we get to ability to pay. And they all are linked. Yeah, this bill only deals with one, but the other two are part of what determines how the state will prioritize its investment in levies. And in doing that, the current law says that DWR the department shall require the local agency, which means the reclamation district, to provide information regarding the agency's ability to pay for the cost of levee maintenance or improvement, and so forth. Well, what Gil said confirms what we've learned, that the Department of Water Resources has not found a way to do that. As a consequence, the districts that he describes that have little ability to pay are considered the same as the urbanized districts or other districts that do have a great ability to pay. Seems to me our job as the council is to look at this, provide information, and encourage a rational approach to it, as opposed to what seems to be the practice, which is we'll treat everybody the same. And the same means $1,000 per mile, and then 75% cost share. So this legislation would go for just 2 years. It seems to me that we ought to recommend that the bill be amended to increase the deductible to $2,500, recognizing that there hasn't been any change over time. Now, the objection to that is that's hard for some districts to do. And it seems to me the remedy, and that's what the short time frame might occur, and the MOU could help do, the MOU meaning the agreement with the council, the Department of Water Resources, and the Reclamation Board, is to figure out how to do ability to pay. A deductible is treating everybody the same, but in fact, that's how the department has considered the districts so far already, by giving them all 75%. Until we have an ability to pay that does recognize the difference between poor reclamation districts and those with considerable resources to pay, I would recommend that if we were to endorse this bill, we do so with an amendment that increases the deductible to $2,500.
And that would be in keeping with the endorsement this council made in March when we endorsed the Delta Levy Investment Strategy into CEQA. Is that a...
Well, I'd defer to Skip.
Okay.
If he wanted to make the motion to support the bill, I would offer this as an amendment and ask that we take a vote on the amendment before we go to the main motion.
And Pat, I'm not saying I disagree with your process, but it's like deciding that we'll raise it to $2,500 as the deductible. And the basis for that is because we haven't done anything to it for a long time.
The basis of that was a cost of living increase from, I think it was it was in the mid-1980s?
1981, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, cost of living increases are one thing, but I don't think they really reflect or address what's really happening in the Delta. And so I would encourage this council to not make a decision based on, well, we got to do something. You know, we supported 2,500, but, you know, as I heard from Gilbert, do we have a plan? How do we know that 2,500 is the right number? Ability to pay, as a Delta Protection member, we've struggled with this ability to pay in the feasibility study. It is not easy. And so I would say, why don't we give it a chance? Why don't we say, let's support the bill as is and give it those 2 years to have the governor and the legislature and the experts like Gil and Tom and the rest of them to suggest changes. It may be 2,500, but I hate to say, you know, support with Amendment 2,500 and not really have a basis other than cost of living. Cost of living really depends on where you're at and what you do for a living.
See, but what I heard is that you just can't figure it out. I mean, that this has been struggling with ability to pay for some time now, and the witnesses seem to indicate that that really isn't a practicable approach. I mean,
Well, and
we're kind of
that's,
caught in between here, but do you expect to figure this all out in the next 2 years?
well, I'm expecting that, given the
We haven't in the last
the
10 years.
enthusiasm and the importance of this issue, we ought to give it the 2 years to at least try to resolve. At the end of 2020, we may be sitting here saying, it's going away, because, for a variety of reasons. But we ought to give it our best approach, do the study, and then decide whether it's 2,500 or something less, and see whether or not there's an ability to pay from the farmers.
Susan?
So, one of the remarks from Gil helped me realize that perhaps, and I don't know where to put this, but another consideration besides an agency's ability to pay is the costs that we avoid to the state of California in the future by maintaining certain levies. And Gil, you know better than I the lay of the land out there, and which levies are not in good shape and which are in excellent shape, and level of development and urbanization. And so there are so many factors other than ability to pay. And what I'm hearing is it's extremely difficult to assess ability to pay, yet DWR has been basing past funding decisions on some assessment of ability to pay. So what I would offer is that there is some increase in the deductible, given it's been since 1981, that in addition to ability to pay, another consideration be the costs avoided to the state of California. There are probably several other factors, and in the future, given what Gil told us about how this subventions program has been improved over the years through collaboration and input from stakeholders, I think moving forward, we should find some mechanism to offer technical advice in future legislation and look at ways we can improve the subventions program so that it does incorporate more than ability to pay. And we can make those subtle differentiations that you described.
Yeah, if I can add some
Gil, before you begin, Susan, Patrick rightly pointed out that there are 3 issues related to this. Ability to pay is one, and identified the memorandum of understanding that we have with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and DWR to develop guidelines addressing many things, including ability to pay. I'm satisfied that could be a very good process and cut through some of the inability that has plagued us for a decade in trying to, including some of the considerations that you've just made. In terms of what's before us today, that's probably not something we're going to be able to solve, but the subventions extension, the program extension, and the deductible seem to be a couple of issues before us that are tangible. Is that fair? Okay.
If I could add some clarification to the deductible. What the program's done over the years, we recognize that, yeah, urban levy districts could take advantage of the program and use all the money if they wanted to. And so what the program did, we put priorities and caps so that wouldn't happen. So the first priority is $20,000 per mile, which is considered maintenance, which at the time was the estimate of what it cost to maintain a levee. Those numbers are going up. The DWR, through their state plan of flood control, is now estimating closer to $40,000 or $50,000 per mile. But right now, we're capped at $20,000. The next priority is HMP, and then beyond that would be Bulletin 192. So what would happen in the case of an urbanizing levy competing with a rural levy or ag levy is that they'd both have the same priority up to $20,000 per mile. But then the urban levy is well beyond Bulletin 192. So any work they do beyond that is not going to be funded. There's not enough money. So that the other districts that do have to get up to PL 99 or Bulletin 192 or even HMP would have priority for that money. So that's what the program's done to limit that sort of thing, so that the urban levies don't take advantage of the program.
Again, Gil, thanks. Ken?
Yeah, no, thank you, Gil. This has been my most difficult learning curve on Delta maintenance and improvements. And, you know, I remember the discussion, and it was pretty clear that there was a range of affordability for different districts. And you know, one of the concerns I have is we went through this process, and we did start talking about this concept of beneficiaries pay, and it seemed like the issue was much bigger than just, you know, what was the deductible, you know, and I remember asking staff, well, if we raise the deductible, how much is that going to generate? And it was like, well, you know, maybe $2 or $3 million a year more. And so we started talking about, well, what's, you know, there's a big need, there needs to be a stable revenue source, but everybody's got to pay a fair share. And, you know, I think the Protection Commission's report and kind of DWR struggling with this just kind of brings that into focus. So I guess, you know, we've got the MOU out there. We made our conclusions, 2,500 a mile was in there, as was the ability to pay. But also, I think the bigger policy issue is, okay, if there's ever going to be some broader funding mechanism beyond just relying on the next water bond, then there's got to be sort of this fair share beneficiaries pay approach. And at a minimum, it seemed like coming off the 1981 dollars was one of the things that can do that. And so that's why I understand it's only for 2 years, but, you know, it seems like if we were to support this, the 732, then we'd be inconsistent with an action that the council took, and there was a reason we took that action. I mean, I think we kept the 75% up as part of what we recommended. So I don't know how to get around that part, and also, you know, what message does that send as you start to talk about beneficiaries pay and other funding mechanisms, you know, when we're not at a minimum doing something to adjust that for 35, 36 years of inflation.
And Skip, to that point, what I would say is it's unfortunate, had I known that this discussion was going to go this way around the deductible, I may have been more vocal about the deductible.
Skip, we talked about this at the last meeting.
Yeah.
I pointed out the inconsistency of the Fraser bill and the action that this council took in March. I couldn't have been more clear.
Mr. Chair, if I may. You were clear, but sometimes this is a learning process for all of us. And that's why we have folks that come to this podium and talk about what really is happening. We can sit up here and say, 2,500, that sounds like a good number. But what is that number really based on? Well, we haven't adjusted it for 25 years. Well, that is no reason to adjust it. Let's look at the statistics that say 2,500 is the appropriate number. And that's all I'm saying is that why don't we decide whether or not, yeah, we've got an MOU, sure, but what's to say that you can't decide that maybe there's some additional factors we didn't consider? And let's look at it more closely and really decide whether or not the ability to pay. I don't think we even have a report that is going to show the ability to pay, who can be captured in that because of all the assessment restrictions. The 2,500, I'm not wed to the 1,000, but I'm certainly not supporting 2,500 just to say, well, it's been there a long time, we need to increase that deductible.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very uncomfortable talking about 1,000, 2,500, 2,000, 1,500. I don't know what the number is going to be, but the lack of language, the lack of information that we should have before a decision like this is made is lacking. We don't really know what the impact of what we're doing. Whether we support the bill, oppose the bill, whatever we do, I'm just uncomfortable with the idea of suddenly making a decision on this issue, having not had the kind of, I think, the background. Maybe we've had some in the past, but specifically on this bill, we haven't had that kind of information. And we don't have that kind of, we have some testimony, and thank God we have some good testimony, but that doesn't necessarily convince me we should take action based upon what was said here today.
Patrick?
Thank you, this has been helpful. The judge strikes me as making an essential point about inadequate knowledge, and my inclination now is to abstain if you make that motion rather than offer an amendment based on 2,500. But I do think that the policy of the state should look to updating that deductible, and it ought to seriously make a decision on ability to pay, however imperfect, which it hasn't done. And I think that the supporters of the bill are aiming at the part that they want the most, but it's not clear that there's serious attention to those other aspects. So on that basis, I don't want to confuse the issue or make it harder for my colleagues to vote on a number that, would benefit from more study, which, by the way, our recommendation in RRR4 is not a dollar amount itself, right? So we didn't even do that, so I don't want to impose that either. But I don't want to support the bill in this form, given its limited consideration of the financial issues.
And Patrick, I appreciate and I respect that position. I appreciate and respect the position. It's obvious that there's no support right now for 732. So I'm not going to make the motion because I don't want it to appear as though we're not supporting it. I think we're neutral at best on the issue, and we're not opposed. At least I don't hear that we're opposed to it. We just, as the judge said, we don't, or I won't put words in your mouth, Judge, but you don't feel there's enough information right now. So we've had a good discussion. I hope we've learned something along the way.
And I would offer to Assemblymember Frazier's representative that we went on record in March supporting up to 75% the subventions program, and you've heard the discussion today. We stand at the ready to work with your office or any legislative office to help fashion something that will further implement the Delta Plan. So I don't want to leave this discussion without reminding everyone that we've spent a lot of time developing the Delta Levy investment strategy, and we have heard from a lot of people and conducted a lot of public meetings, and that all went into the product that was endorsed in March. So thank you all who participated in the conversation today, and unless anyone else has anything further to say, then I think that concludes this item.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Just to preview the other agenda items today, as part of our efforts regarding the Delta Plan Amendment for Conveyance Storage and Operations, we've invited Dave Bolin from the Association of California Water Agencies to provide a summary of ACWA's recently released report on integrated storage. That'll be coming up later, as well as a panel on the Delta Conservation Framework. The Department of Fish and Wildlife has been developing the framework with Delta stakeholders and others over the past year. So their staff will provide an update today, and the council staff will discuss its relationship to our upcoming ecosystem amendment. And with that, I conclude my executive officer's report.
Thank you, Jessica. Any final questions of Jessica? If not, then we shall proceed to a landmark file item number 8, lead scientist report, beginning with our co-lead scientist, soon-to-be retired lead scientist, Dr. Cliff Dahm.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is my last presentation to you. I want to start by thanking the council. It's been 2 years that seem to have passed very, very quickly. I have enjoyed my times to speak with you. I really endorse and appreciate what the council does. I find the members to be very informative, cordial, and occasionally challenging, and I enjoy that opportunity to interact with you. I want to welcome John Callaway. I think you have a good person who is stepping in to fill the lead scientist position. I really also want to thank the U.S. Geological Survey, who supports this position and supported me these 2 years. And I also want to say that the staff of the Delta Stewardship Council is a first-rate group of people to work with, and I will miss the people probably more than anything else as I move into my second attempt at retirement. Hopefully a little more effective than my first attempt. I want to say that the transition is going well, and I appreciate the opportunity to have that transition. I think this is something that will allow John Callaway to come up to speed a little more quickly than he might have otherwise, and it's also been just a good opportunity for me to go around and meet with and mostly listen to a lot of the people that we work with, both within the council, but also many of the stakeholders outside the council that we interact with on a regular basis. And so we have another week of that, and then my final day will be September the 1st. So we've decided to split the lead scientist report, and I'm going to take on the first part of it and then turn it over to John, who will then turn it over to Catherine for by the numbers. So first of all, to go through just a few things. One, at the last council meeting, you received and accepted the Science Action Agenda 2017 to 2021. You have at your places the just recently, I think literally 2 days ago, published version of this. And John and I are both already starting some actions to try to implement some of the things that is in this Science Action Agenda. And I think we have the opportunity to actually make some substantive progress in some of the areas that have been identified here as key areas that require science support. So that is moving forward. The three areas, so we're going to jump around a little bit in the lead scientist report. I'm going to talk about 3 of the items, and then John's going to talk about 3 of the items before we finish with Catherine. The first item that I wanted to talk a little bit about was a short essay published in the latest issue of San Francisco Estuarine Watershed Science. This paper was written by some of the leading researchers doing research both in the Bay and the Delta, and they've also teamed up with a science writer. The paper is titled Water Wasted to the Sea with a question mark. It's an interesting article. We met here a couple weeks ago with the editor of the journal, Sam Luoma. And one of the things that the journal has been doing now for about 2 years has been to ask people to write these kinds of essays. And so the essays in the past have had to do with things like sigma in the groundwater and how we're going to basically deal with some of the both science and policy issues that relate to sigma. There's been essays on how do we measure and quantify the amounts of primary production historically and currently within the Delta. There's been some essays that focused on the baylands and what we're going to be doing in San Francisco Bay relative to some of the potential green engineering that might be used to deal with sea level rise, for example. So this is a continuation of that, but the one thing that Sam shared with John and me that I thought was quite interesting is that since they have added this to the journal, which has been for about the last 2 years, they more than doubled the number of downloads and hits that the journal receives. So this has clearly been something that has engaged both the scientific community and the policy community. And so This is, I think, a nice example of another one of these types of essays. It actually is one of two essays that's in the latest issue. The other essay, much longer, is also, I think, of some interest. The other essay is Extinction Inevitable for Delta Smelt and Longfin Smelt? An Opinion and Recommendations for Recovery. That's the second essay. In addition, our Independent Science Board has an article in this issue of the journal written by all 10 members of the Independent Science Board, and it's on facilitating adaptive management in California, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta. So some interesting papers. Let me just make a few comments about the water wasted to the sea, question mark. So they start out this essay by pointing out that when we have wet years, like we've had this past year, there's often people calling for, why don't we do a better job of utilizing this water that we get in our wet year conditions? And can't we store more of this water? Can't we recharge more of our depleted groundwater? And they certainly point out that this is one perspective from people who certainly have very real needs for that water. They also point out that there is other aspects and there are other points of view relative to water that is available. And so they go through a series of short, sort of one-paragraph descriptions of things like the importance of this water for protecting drinking and agricultural water in Delta counties and by repelling saltwater intrusion. And they point out that this water is very important for stimulating migration and spawning of native fish. And they point out that this water promotes some of the food webs and dissipates some of the toxins that are, for example, found in the environment. They go on to talk about how this is also helping manage stormwater within the bay. They talk about how a number of restoration projects around the bay need sediment, and this brings sediment into the system. They point out that there are a number of certainly of birds that utilize these wet conditions and have better habitat when you have these wet years. They point out that the fishing industry is often aided by these wet years. And so they have a series of things. I've put them in bullet format in the little essay that's there. But basically, as they go through these list of things, they basically argue that it's a bit of where you stand and where you view this issue. But this essay argues that when you consider the full suite of ecosystem services, water reaching the sea is not entirely wasted. And that is kind of the bottom line of this essay. Page and a half. Well, worth a quick read if you're interested in it. Second topic that I would like to bring to your attention is a annual report that has just recently been issued on Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe is a iconic system, one that I used to in my limnology class when I was teaching at the university. I used to point out that Lake Tahoe was the second clearest lake in the United States. And I also used to point out that its condition produces a clarity that is generally between 20 and 25 meters. You can see what's called a Secchi disc, a disc that is basically a black and white disc that you lower down until you no longer can see that disc. And Lake Tahoe is one of the clearest lakes in the world. I used to talk about the clearest lake in the world, one that I had the pleasure of doing research on for about a decade, and that was Crater Lake, only to find out last year or two that Crater Lake is no longer the clearest lake in the world. And it's not because Crater Lake got less clear, it's because they've discovered some lakes in the South Island of New Zealand that are even clearer. So it's a, yeah, that's a good thing. So anyway, a couple things on the report. They basically point out that, that there's been good news on the clarity at Lake Tahoe. There's a few things that they have that there's worry or concern about. One is the potential for introduction of some of the invasive mussel species that are certainly in our area, in our region. So they're redoubling their efforts to try to check boats and to keep these invasive species from getting into the lake. They also do have already the invasive Asian clam in the system, and in areas where the invasive Asian clam is doing well, it tends to concentrate a lot of the nutrients because of their filter feeding, and they're getting pretty dense benthic algal mats, which are now detaching and ending up, particularly on the South Shore. So that's a concern from an aesthetics perspective. They highlight in the report. And the one thing that I thought was of interest, and I think is more region-wide, and it also has a major effect on the Delta, and that is that over the last 4 years, Lake Tahoe has been measurably warming. It's been warming at about a half a degree centigrade, so almost a degree Fahrenheit per year for the last 4 years. So the lake is becoming warmer. Because of its warmth, it's also becoming a bit more stratified, and so there's a buildup of nutrients occurring in the bottom part of the lake, which potentially at some point in time could be remobilized and might produce some changes in the overall clarity. So just wanted to highlight a few of those key points on that report. And then, yeah, question. Yeah, it's a graben lake. If I remember correctly, it is slightly over 500 meters in depth.
The question was, how deep is Lake Tahoe?
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why it is so clear, because it drops off quickly. It goes from shallow to deep, and the vast majority of the lake is quite deep. And again, I'm trying to pull from the recesses of what I used to teach in my class, and I think that's right. If I'm wrong, I will correct myself and get you that information. It's slightly less deep than Crater Lake, which I do know for sure. It is the deepest lake in the United States. It's 575 meters deep. So, and I think Tahoe is slightly over 500. Yes.
So Cliff, is the concern with the sort of increased stratification that you get that lower level going sort of anaerobic, or that it takes a long time, and when it does turn over, you're going to really mess with the water quality there?
In a system with such low productivity and such high clarity, probably anaerobic or hypoxic conditions is not a concern. But the issue is that it does then build up some of the replenished nutrients, and that if you did get, for example, either a colder than normal winter, or you got a period of really sustained high winds, that deeper water, which is now more nutrient rich, could be mixed back into the surface water and produce higher rates of primary production and less clarity in future years. So right now, it's most of that material is staying at or near the bottom, from what I
Is this
understand.
one of the threats from climate change to deep lakes and?
Worldwide.
Worldwide.
Worldwide, no question about it. Yeah, as they warm, particularly in the temperate areas, they tend to become more stratified, and so you have this potential for building up nutrients in the deep water. And then the third thing I was going to talk about just briefly is we've completed the second phase of a peer review, independent scientific peer review for the Delta Regional Monitoring Program. The Delta Regional Monitoring Program monitors pesticides and toxicity, mercury, pathogens, and nutrients. We provided a review of their monitoring program. The second review is a follow-up, just to see how well some of the initial reviews were being implemented. One of the key items that this review panel has focused on is that to do a good monitoring design, you need to get an applied statistician involved early on and come up with a robust methodology to make the measurements so that you can analyze them and get the maximum amount of knowledge out of them. This is, I think, similar advice could be given for any of the kind of monitoring programs that go on within the Delta. In this case, the focus is on those four constituents that I just mentioned, but the review team basically said, get the statistics right at the beginning. Don't kind of try to figure out how to do statistics after the data has been brought in. And so that was the key take-home of their message. So those are the key, I think those are the points that I wanted to make, and I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to finish up the items that are in your briefing, and then bring up Catherine for by the numbers. John.
Great. Thank you, Cliff. And before I start, I just want to say I'm very excited to be here and to be taking over the leadership role for this science program. I know it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be difficult to maintain the level that Cliff and others have done, but I look forward to the challenge and to working with the council into the future. So today what I'm going to do is talk about two recent papers in the issue just before Cliff mentioned of San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science that focus, it was a special issue, the previous issue, on focusing specifically on the Central Valley and focusing on the joint venture within the Central Valley of managing bird species within the Central Valley. So the whole issue, there's about 6 or 7 papers looking at shorebirds, at water birds, at birds that use riparian habitats, at oak woodlands and grasslands. And so we chose 2 papers to look at. One focuses on at-risk species within the Central Valley, and the second focuses on breeding shorebirds. So for the at-risk species, this was a paper done by David Schufert and Megan Hertel, and the idea is it's really sort of an initial step to identify how to set up a framework for managing these species and for setting up objectives for what can be achieved for those species. So they set up they identified just a very simple 2-step process to identify what the at-risk species really are, based on, are the species truly using the Central Valley in an important way? And are they listed, or are they species of particular concern that have been identified by other conservation organizations? They identify 38 at-risk species. That's out of the about 400 species that use the Central Valley. So about 10% of the species in the Central Valley are identified as at risk. It includes a wide range of species. It's not just water birds. It includes ducks, waders, shorebirds like you might expect, but also birds of prey and some of the land birds as well that use the Central Valley. So they identify those first. They identify the issues in terms of the habitat, the threats to those species. The threats, like as you might expect, include habitat loss, crop conservation, invasive species, pollution, overexploitation, or disease. By far, habitat loss is most important, with over 90% especially for the wetland or water-focused species, with over 90% of those areas lost. In terms of what their plan, so they identify those, how to identify the at-risk species, and then in terms of how to move forward with setting up objectives. They don't actually set up the objectives, they just identify the framework for how to do that. They identify that we need to identify the limiting factors for the species, what the assumptions behind identifying those limiting factors are. We need to identify where there's information gaps about the species, where we need to learn more if we don't know what the limiting factors are. And then build on existing established methods that have already been developed for individual species. Many of the species have been well studied, and there are some information and objectives or methods that have been identified for how to improve the species, but others haven't. So sort of use a group approach looking at similar species. And what they really try to emphasize is the need for this transparent method for, rather than just ad hoc identification of objectives, really going through this stepwise method as a way to set up the priorities, set up the objectives for those key at-risk species within the Central Valley. Then the second another paper out of those 6 or 7 looks at breeding shorebirds. For the breeding shorebirds paper, there's actually a little more data on these, so they move beyond just the framework, but try to start setting up what might be some ways, what might be some objectives to try to improve shorebirds within the Central Valley. There are 7, and this is particularly for nesting species that use the valley in the spring and summer. There's 7 species that nest there. They chose to focus in primarily on 2, the American avocet and the black-necked stilt, that are the most abundant and the most well-studied, so there actually are a reasonable amount of information to set up objectives. And they identify that currently there's about 17,000 acres of semi-permanent wetlands that are available for nesting, compared to And that's only about 10% of what existed historically. And large acres of rice production, about 540,000 acres of rice that also is used, although that the rice fields are used at much lower numbers or densities. So they look at the overall populations. The goal is to get a population of 50,000 individuals, which based on some, as a general threshold, would provide enough genetic diversity within the populations to maintain them. Currently, the blackneck stilts are at about 30,000, and American avocets are only at about 10. So there's a large need to increase the populations. In order to get to those larger populations, they look at the densities of current birds within the area, and then they come up with some target numbers for what would be needed to restore in order to get to a 50,000 number for each of the two species. And that would require significant areas, close to 300,000 acres of restored wetlands. They identify that as a long-term goal over the coming century, not something that they think is likely to be achieved immediately. But again, I think a big take-home message from this is it's really a thoughtful way of identifying what we currently know, what we need to understand in order to improve species into the future, and setting up those goals now so that we can see how we move forward into the future. So those are those two bird-focused papers out of San Francisco Estuary Watershed Science. The third thing that we wanted to mention is a poster that's here that you could look at that also has a bird focus. So this is sort of a bird month for some of our research that we're highlighting. And the poster is actually came from last year's Bay Delta Science Conference. It was done by staff from the East Bay Regional Park District, and it looked at snowy plovers, an endangered or a threatened species, not in the Delta itself, but that are how they're using a particular area on Alameda Island in San Francisco Bay. And the reason that we chose this poster to focus on was primarily because it really identifies the incorporation of citizen science. So what they did was they looked to see what the plover use is of a reserve on the south end of Alameda Island. And then they followed the birds, they followed bird numbers over 3 years using entirely volunteers, coordinated by the East Bay Regional Park District staff. They had, I think it was over 300, close to 325 surveys over a 3-year period using those volunteers. They documented not just the plover numbers, but the impacts to plovers. They looked at gulls, ravens, crows, humans, and dogs, and if they're coming to visit or if other birds are flying in, how that might affect the plovers. And what they found was actually the dogs are by far the worst. And if dogs are in the area, dogs are not allowed in the area, but still come in. If a dog comes into the area, 80% chance that the plovers are likely to leave and be impacted in some sort of negative way. The other important thing was that I think they made an effort for outreach to improve awareness of that the plovers were using the area and putting in a few simple signs and a simple fence, just a little rope fence, not anything fancy, increased numbers from 6 to 30 wintering plovers at the site. So a significant use of just simple methods to improve numbers there. So those, I encourage you to look at the poster that's here. And those are the three sort of papers or information issues that we wanted to present to you. And the two other issues are just information items. Coming up in October is the State of the San Francisco Estuary Conference that's held in San Francisco and is sort of a companion conference in alternate years to the Bay Delta Science Conference. It has a slightly more of a management focus, not almost all management focused presentations rather than a mix of science and management as we have here at the Bay Delta Science Conference. There's about 700 to 800 attendees. Although it's the state of the San Francisco Estuary, it includes the Delta, and there's a significant effort. I've been on the planning committee over the last few years for that conference, and there's a large effort to bring in more work from Suisun Bay and from the Delta. So this year, There are 3 sessions on the Suisun Bay or the Delta. One that Jessica Law here from the council has put together on lessons learned from the recent Science Enterprise Workshop. There's also a session on restoration planning within the Delta, and a separate session on water quality and restoration within Suisun Bay. So if you happen to be, it's October 10th and 11th, and it will, it's like I think I mentioned, 700 to 800 people at the conference. So it's very well attended and really an important part of the awareness of management issues within the region. And the last thing to point out is the Delta Science Fellows. As you know, and as you've supported, a significant part of the science program's funding for research goes to support science fellows, both predoctoral and postdoctoral fellows. And that was just announced recently. Applications are due in September, towards the end of September. And I think that the fellowship program really is an outstanding program that the council and the science program supports. I think you had a presentation from some of the fellows just not too long ago, and you saw the great work that they're doing. I think what's really important is the fellows program is not the traditional science fellowship in that it really focuses on a mix of science and management. And so students or postdocs have to have not just an academic mentor, but a management mentor as well. And it really pushes students to think about the importance of applied science and management issues. And I also want to highlight, Cliff mentioned the publication of the Science Action Agenda. This year's fellow call for applications focuses directly on the Science Action Agenda, and the areas of interest that are highlighted and that we will be funding are those 5 areas within the Action Agenda. So I think that's the beginning of the implementation of the Science Action Agenda. So any questions?
Questions? Susan?
So thank you, John. I have a question on the population and habitat objectives paper, the estimated 284,000 acres of semi-permanent wetland that would be needed to achieve the population objectives. Are those prioritized and mapped and something that could inform the ecosystem amendment to the Delta Plan?
They are not. It's just so they're just based on the acreage needed to support those. So it's just an acreage target, and it's for the entire Central Valley. So no, they're preliminary, I would say.
Other questions?
The population increase of the snowy plovers, that's interesting. It's just all just sort of signage and fencing had that effect, but that's kind of an intensive urban area and just keeping people away so they don't disturb nesting and that kind of thing. Do you see applicability of that just in urban areas or outside, or is this just the need for kind of signage and fencing in sensitive areas? And is that something that you can see or think about seeing useful within the Delta?
So definitely, that area of the south end of Alameda is very urbanized and intensively used. But I think it's relevant, and there's more and more interest and understanding in how human use, whether it's biking or hiking, how different activities affect wildlife, whether it's birds or mammals or otherwise. And so there's more and more understanding of the need for a buffer between a refuge so clearly the focus would be on those high priority areas where there's large wildlife use. But I think there's definitely growing interest and more data. In the past, it's been much more best professional judgment in terms of what is an appropriate buffer. Is it 100 feet? Is it 200 feet? And now we're beginning to get a little bit more
Seems like a
information.
cheap way to have a positive impact.
It is. I think the challenge is maintaining access, because you want people, you don't want to have wildlife refuges or things that are off limits and everything's there, but people won't value it unless they have the opportunity to see it and participate. But finding the right mix is definitely a challenge.
So maybe we should think about this as we start to prepare next year's budget.
Sure.
Okay. Anything else? John, thank you.
Okay. And then to finish up, we do have by the numbers. So as you've heard before, Catherine Courtier is going to give us a overview of the by the numbers for this month.
Good morning, or I guess maybe afternoon, council members and Chair Fiorini. I was hoping that I would be able to send off Cliff and welcome John with some relatively green numbers this month, and it seems like for the most part we have that. So just to start off with our precipitation, these values have stayed fairly constant. We haven't gotten a significant amount of precipitation in the last month, but just to note that for the average, these values are definitely well above the 100%. A new point for this month's by the numbers report on the next slide is, I think I had mentioned this last month. Could we go to the next slide, please? Is water temperature. And after talking both to Cliff and John, they decided it was something that might be interesting to report. So while the numbers are currently orange, I don't want that to be the hard kind of color ranking. We haven't reported on water temperature since 2015, and when it was done then, there wasn't really a great way of kind of binning the values, and so that was just kind of a precautionary number that I put for right now. So that's probably not necessarily reflective of its actual ranking, and that's something I'll be working on in the next month for the next report. So we have 3 different areas that we are looking at temperature for: Clear Creek, Collinsville, and Clifton Court Forebay. And for Clear Creek, this area specifically, the temperature is managed for Chinook salmon. And so basically anything above 56 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty harmful for the fish. And just to give you a slight bit of background, the last time we reported on this value, which was August of 2015, it was measuring at 57 degrees, so it's fairly similar. Both the Collinsville and Clifton Court Forebay are managed for Delta smelt, and so for them, anything above 77 degrees is bad. In Collinsville in August 2015, there was a temperature of 73 degrees, and then at Clifton Court Forebay, it was 80 degrees in 2015, so a nice decrease for them. For all 3 of these values, these are monthly averages, and the values that go into that average are measured hourly. So next month, I will come back to you with a breakdown of how the scoring will be for these temperature values, and if anybody has any questions or would like to see any or hear more background information on why these locations were chosen or the species, feel free to let me know, and I will include those in next month's report. Moving on to reservoir storage. I also wanted to, in the paper handout, when I had generated the numbers yesterday, I think there was something going on with CDEC and they didn't have any measurement for Oroville, so I wanted to correct that and say that it's at 75%, and that is, of course, because they're still working on construction there. So, but at Shasta and San Luis, we both have great numbers that are well over the 100% average. So moving on to water quality and flow, we similarly see some very great green numbers with our values well over 100%. The salinity is also low for this time of year. Last year, in 2016, we had some slightly higher values with a noticeably higher value at the Vernalis point, which was at 568. So it's nice to see that back down at a lower temperature. This month, we do not have any fish numbers, so this is a very short report. So unless there are any questions, that concludes the by the numbers for this month.
Well, Catherine, it's bird month, so that's why we don't have any fish numbers.
Yeah.
Any questions of Catherine? Thank you very much. Great job. Cliff, John, I presume that concludes the lead scientist report? But wait, there's more. I have Cliff by the numbers. Our staff helped me to prepare some information since this is Cliff's last opportunity to sit with us at the head table. Two, Cliff served 2 terms as the lead scientist. 1, he made a trip to Japan and served as the keynote speaker at the Ecology and Civil Engineering Society of Japan, describing perspectives on restoring the California Delta. 50, Cliff oversaw 50 brown bags, 26 during his first term, 22 during his second term. And I know that doesn't add up to 50, but it's pretty close. 59, yeah, within the margin of error. 59, Cliff supported 59 council meetings with lead scientist reports. 59. That to me is an amazing number. Cliff authored 1 edition of the State of Bay Delta Science. 1, he received an award of excellence from the Society for Freshwater Science in 2016. 2, Cliff was the plenary speaker at 2 large-scale conferences. 1, the biennial Bay Delta Science Conference in 2016. 1, at the State of the San Francisco Estuary Conference in 2015. But Cliff, there was one thing that I couldn't put a number on. You are such a well-respected and admired leader in the Delta by more people than we can count. We appreciate your service. You have been, for me, having the opportunity to work with you on a weekly basis, I have gained so much knowledge and learned so much. When you returned to serve as the second term, I had already developed a very high level of respect for you. One of the things that is common in the accolades that are given to you is your ability to distill very complex issues and put them in terms that laymen can understand. And we will forever be grateful for all the contributions you've made by these numbers and the many other things that I didn't mention. So on behalf of the council, I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation to you as lead scientist for the Delta Science Program and for your enthusiasm, collaborative approach, and dedication to the California Delta through the pursuit of usable science.
It's been an honor and a privilege to serve the council. Thank you so much. This is very, very nice.
Okay, unless anyone else has anything further to add on this file item, I'm going to recommend that we recess for lunch and return at 1 o'clock sharp. Recess for lunch. Be back at 1. All right, welcome back. We are now resuming with file item number 9. This afternoon, we have 2 important presentations that we'll be receiving. Jessica?
Sure, I'm just going to kick it over directly to Anthony in the interest of time.
Thank you, Chairman Fiorini, council members, for the opportunity to present this agenda item. This informational agenda item will present an overview of the Association of California Water Agencies Storage Integration Study. Since the summer of 2015, the council has been involved in the development of the Delta Plan Amendment for conveyance storage systems and the operation of both. The council has heard panels of expert and stakeholder testimony, developed the guiding 19 principles, received public comments, and adopted the draft amendment language to begin the environmental review of the potential Delta Plan CSO amendment. Today you will hear a briefing to the council on a relevant study prepared by MBK engineers for Aqua. The storage integration study is one of the only storage studies which analyzes the integration of existing and potential new storage projects and their operations. This study is another tool to assist decision makers to evaluate and prioritize storage projects and their benefits. We are also reviewing the study for its potential inclusion into the council's environmental review for the Delta Plan CSO amendment. It is one of many studies examined to analyze the Delta Plan amendments in a programmatic environmental impact report. So on my right is David Bolin. Mr. David Bolin is Aqua's Director of State Regulatory Relations. He will provide the overview of the study, its results, and the key conclusions. David?
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Again, I'm David Bolin with the Association of California Water Agencies, and we appreciate being invited.
Anthony, could
Get
you
real close.
turn the microphone on for him?
David Bolin with the Association of California Water Agencies, and I appreciate the invitation that we received to present our study to you today. It's been a study that's been in progress for some time, and I'll go back a little bit over the context and genesis in my presentation, but just as sort of an introductory level. We've been kind of working on this issue for a long time. As you are aware, the association has over 430 or so public water agencies up and down the state of California, many of which are already heavily involved with storage projects, individual projects, as well as systems operations considerations. And of course, we're engaged on a lot of levels with state policymaking on storage as well as water management in general. And so in that sort of context, we wanted to zero in on this question of potential and kind of do some analytical work, some quantitative work to try to get at this kind of premise that new storage and investment in new storage could really help us out. And it was interesting to be in the earlier sessions this morning where there was a kind of a comment made about the perception that water had been flushing through the system. Particularly this winter was an example where, you know, we have rainfall all over the state of California, thankfully. Everyone was appreciated the fact that we got such a huge winter. But one of the critiques and concerns out there, of course, was all of that water moving through the system and then moving out into the ocean, and the fact that our groundwater recharge situation is still a work in progress, that we have a lot of work yet to do in terms of groundwater recharge and water management in general, moving water around the state and using it more effectively. So that was sort of the policy context for why Aqua undertook this study. And so I'll just go ahead and step through my slide presentation pretty quickly and then try to leave plenty of time for your interactive kind of questions, because there are huge implications of this study and a lot of different ways that we can take it. And I do want to kind of daylight a little bit about what we're thinking about next steps as well. But one of the first things I wanted to start with was the overarching considerations and sort of the, again, policy context in which we do this, and the fact that Aqua recognizes, water agencies in California recognize the fact that water in the ecosystem has value, and water flowing through the ecosystem provides these benefits, many of which were mentioned earlier in the discussion about flows, about salinity management, about water quality, about ecosystem values, and so forth, and that much of that work is centered on the work you're doing here in the Delta. But of course, it has statewide implications as well. Water in the ecosystem is important. And then, of course, the when water is abundant, we think we can manage it, and if we do manage it in an effective way, we can add significant value to both the supply side as well as the ecosystem. And that's a theme throughout this document, is that we aren't presuming, based on the quantitative work that you'll see soon, we're not presuming all that water is going to be going into in consumptive uses for cities and counties and the citizens in terms of water supply. We're presuming that it will be used by the state effectively to meet all of the goals, particularly, specifically, the co-equal goals that are the center of the Delta planning process. But that concept of co-equal goals has been kind of brought to a larger scale in statewide water management. And it's pretty much a presumed conclusion, I think, on the part of the agencies I work with and the association, that co-equal goals are kind of the rules that we're going to be living by henceforth in all kinds of management decisions. And then we also wanted to just emphasize that we're studying a potential here based on a kind of a suite of projects, some of which are, it's the existing system, and some of which are being proposed on this existing system. And we wanted to look at how those projects interact with each other, how they interact with the existing system, and then what could be done with conveyance improvements. So we have a kind of a with and without conveyance improvements in the Delta. And then this idea that we can make some progress on groundwater recharge is kind of a context as well. So the policy context you're well aware of for the most part. I'm sure this is all kind of history, but I'll just go through it real quick. And that Aqua did this Aqua Blueprint a long time ago. And as a matter of fact, I think it was under Randy's presidency of Aqua that we did this Aqua Blueprint, which was an articulation of a robust kind of all of the above water management scenario. And that was a policy document that's important to us. And then, of course, the Delta Plan in 2013 zeroes in on this idea of co-equal goals and some of the considerations for that. We have a statewide water action plan, which Aqua was working on itself to try to articulate more about what specific actions need to occur and the fact that we need all of the actions, not just our favorite actions. And that then influenced the California Water Action Plan, which was adopted soon thereafter. And that California Water Action Plan kind of, at a very high level, frames the challenge that we're facing in California. And of course, then Prop 1 passed in 2014, $2.7 billion for storage. There was then immediately a kind of a question about what are these public benefits? What kinds of storage are we talking about? And that process, we tried to put some policy direction on that and some recommendations into the mix with our Aqua 21st Century Water Storage Policy in 2015, and that's highlighted, and the cover is on that slide. And then, of course, the California Water Commission did its WISP program implementation regulations that are just now finished, and the applications were due on the 14th of August. Now our study is out there. The intent is to inform that process specifically, but also to inform other policy contexts like the CSO amendment and other decisions that the state's making. And then we have the WISP funding decisions that will be coming up in 2018, and of course some funding allocations that we anticipate by 2022 in specific storage for that particular purpose. But I think what we'll find, as we look at this study, is that no matter what the WISP project program does, and no matter what we do with that Proposition 1 money, it's certainly a larger agenda, a larger mission that California is on to increase storage, both above ground storage, surface water storage, as well as increase the value of and the sustainability of our groundwater storage projects. So comprehensive solutions, that's again the context here. We're talking about all of the above scenarios. We're talking in this particular study about surface storage, and we're going to be also talking about groundwater storage, but conveyance comes up with and without in the modeling. We are presuming that a lot of this water is going to be moving into basins where it needs to be used to help solve this sustainability problem in some of those groundwater basins. We're talking about stormwater capture, recycling and desal, conservation, demand management, transfers, and even a significant new need for investment in our headwaters in terms of forest management, just to try to get at some of the water quality and water supply challenges in California. So we're presuming all of the above. On the study itself, again, the hypothesis is if you add some new storage, a whole suite of new storage, some above the delta, some below, some surface, some groundwater, some big, some little, some regional scale, and some, potentially statewide scale, that there's a benefit that will be derived that's bigger than the sum of the parts. That there's this integration benefit, and there's an ability to measure that and kind of lay that on the table. What does that benefit look like? And that we wanted to try to make sure that that discussion was out there, because there's a tendency in the policy arena to try to pick winners and losers, which project's the best, where exactly should we spend a certain amount of money, and to be kind of more narrowly focused, I guess. And the point here is we wanted to focus on the big picture statewide. So we hired MBK engineers. We had the suite of projects that we had a work group put together that many of them represented projects that were potentially in the running for the WISP Prop 1 money, some of which, some of those entities that were participating with our group and helped articulate some projects ended up not submitting projects. They don't have projects in the WISP applications. Of course, other projects did show up. And so if you look at the list here that I've got on this slide, you'll see 8 projects. 6 of those are actually in the, as of the August 14th deadline, 6 of those have applications in for the WISP Prop 1 money. There are 6 other projects that are important. They have potential value there that's going to be evaluated through that WISP process, and they are analogous in many ways to the 2 projects that didn't get dropped in from our list. And so the way we're looking at this list is we're not here to try to promote any particular projects or try to toot the horn of any particular applicants. The emphasis is, again, on this integration and the results of integration with this suite of projects that we had a year ago that we could analyze as part of our modeling, and that if it turns out there's different projects in different locations, they will add their attributes. And the key theme that you'll see as I unpack this a little bit is the fact that each of the projects brings specific attributes, but the magic is in the way those attributes are managed in an integrated way. So, and then after the check marks there, the final bullet, the idea was that we added all these projects with the existing system. And the existing system, of course, is the presumption or the operational assumptions in the modeling were existing regulatory requirements, existing management responsibilities, flood flows, storage operations, all of the kind of assumed, status quo, kind of the before project scenario of where we stand now. And so that was all used as the input, and then we added our projects, and then in addition we added the water fix project as it was about a year ago into the analysis. We could do with and without that. So the geography here, again, you're pretty familiar with this, I suspect, but we have a system that already has existing surface and groundwater, and then superimposed upon that are these 8 projects, and they range all over the state, but mostly are Central Valley oriented and tied into the state and federal projects. And the result of the analysis could come up to, or one of the, I guess you call it the quantitative elements here, is that when you total up all the contributions of these projects, and there's some 1,000 acre feet numbers in each of those boxes, it comes up to 3.5 million acre feet. So the first step in the analytical process, on the modeling process, was to determine whether or not there was any water in the system to actually fill these reservoirs. And so the arrows in these boxes point to different kinds of water years in different parts of the system, and that was sort of the results of the existing system without the projects. That is where the water is in the system geographically and then temporally by water year types. And one, again, theme that's going to come up time and again is variability. This system is extremely variable. And as we did the hydrology and actually modeled all of this, it was all based on historical 82 years of hydrology in the system. And you'll see just tremendous variability by water year and then by geography. So the kind of crux number, one of the crux numbers as an input here was this question of delta outflow above existing requirements. And again, the variability is the thing that jumps out here. We did the top chart shows a monthly averaging, and of course averages are interesting, but not necessarily applicable in terms of water management. And then, even more eye-opening is the annual totals, and you can see, and the years are coded there by their by whether they're wet years or critically dry years or anything in between, and you can see the variability in the system, which we all sort of already knew about, but it's kind of interesting to have the quantitative analysis there. So we identify the fact that there was some existing available export capacity, and that could be integrated into the system. And then the idea was to link the facilities that are north of the delta to the south of the delta. So we looked at conveyance as well, and you could see in the again the available water there. So the results of the study, after we kind of layered in all these projects, is that things range from about 22 million acre feet in wet years to about 1 million acre feet only in critical years. And there's an average of about 10 million acre feet across the entire 82-year analytical period. Again, 3.5 million acre feet in the potential addition to the system. The big yields, I guess, were this idea of additional flexibility and reliability and the ability to actually manage the water in a way that leads to, we believe, increased co-equal goal benefits. And I'll unpack that in a minute in a couple other slides. And so what we got to work with essentially is a new additional carryover of about 1.9 million acre feet on average. And that carryover can be used in a lot of different ways. So the, and again, I pointed out that there are different kinds of benefits, and the main benefits being the increased reliability, but also this idea of ecosystem benefits. An example there is cold water. And so a very specific example that our modeler identified was in the 2015 water year, if we had had these reservoirs, this system, what could we have done with it? And, an example was we would be able to store enormous amount or preserve a lot more cold water in the Shasta system, and then move water for other purposes that was warmer and was more further down in the system, move that through for salinity management and other objectives, other regulatory objectives, and then we would have been able to essentially achieve our temperature objectives through the entire year, even though 2015 was a drought year. And there's a graph that I don't have here, but it basically shows that we got almost all of our rain in a couple peaks. But if we got those peaks and we were able to capture those peaks and move them around, move this water around in the system and manage it more effectively in 2015, we could have delivered on our temperature objectives for salmon in the entire northern part of the state. And that was that was with very little carryover coming into that year. We had already been in several drought years up to that time. And so that's kind of a little vignette, I guess, of some values that we've identified. The idea of the existing reservoirs in terms of the additional is pretty important, and it's kind of eye-opening. You can see that the existing system is relatively less water is available, or a lot less, than in this new system with these new projects. And then the idea of being able to deliver about 400,000 acre feet south of the delta for various purposes, much of which we believe, based on our modeling, would probably be moved into groundwater. In dry years, up to 700,000 acre feet. In even critical years, up to 450,000 acre feet. And that's pretty important. Again, it's the result of having the capability of storing that water when we can get it, sort of the big gulp, little sip thing, the idea of the storing the water when it's available and then moving it in through the system when there's capacity in the system, which is actually in the dry and critically dry years. And that's why that dry year number looks so big. You're going, well, how can you get water out of the system in the dry years? Well, you're using the capacity and you're using storage. So you're using water that was actually captured in the previous years and then moving through the system in the dry years. Again, a result that was eye-opening was the fact that with and without delta conveyance, the graph on the left is the without. It's just adding storage to the system and using the existing conveyance that we have in the delta and operating it just like it currently operates. And then if we have the delta fix, you can see it basically almost doubles the numbers in almost all the years. The one interesting thing is that it doesn't change things in the critical years. And again, that's about capacity in the system. Just, there isn't really a lot of water to move through. But it substantially improves wet and normal year delivery capabilities. And then the question had come up, how much of the available water are you actually grabbing, moving it into storage that isn't going to be in the system? Again, that wouldn't be for ecosystem flow values. And we wanted to quantify that. And so this shows the stored and delivered water under this sort of modeled scenario as a small proportion, relatively smaller proportion of the total. And so in all year types, significant amount of the water remains in the system, is moving through the system, and we're just taking a certain percentage in every year type. Of course, those percentages are relatively larger in the dry and critically dry years, which is a policy question that would need to be answered by some rigorous management, because again, it's up to about 20%, maybe even 25% of available water in those years. So the groundwater results, basically with just existing conveyance, but this new storage sort of suite, we get the red line over a lot of years, over 80 years at about 250,000 acre feet per year. You end up with a fair bit of water in time. Now, of course, that does not alleviate the groundwater overdraft problem that we have entirely by any means, and it makes it clear that there are going to have to be other means used in terms of groundwater management as a whole. But with conveyance, you again get almost double the amount of water, 460,000 acre feet per year. And the key again is you can move that water from where it is to where it could be much more effectively with delta conveyance, improved delta conveyance. And so that's the message there. And that was something that was a positive message that we wanted to send to a lot of our groundwater management agencies that are right now struggling with how they're going to put their SGMA plans together at a basin by basin scale, and the fact that they know they're going to have to do everything. They're going to have to reduce demand. They are going to have to manage those resources very carefully. But the question was, is the entire sustainability project going to have to be based on reductions in the entire southern part of the state? And with storage, it can alleviate some of that problem. So some examples, again, I had mentioned the CVP State Water Reservoir Operations process and protecting storage north, and then creating benefits in cold water, and I had mentioned that. And the projects that kind of can be operated conjunctively to do that are the sites, Centennial and American River conjunctive projects. And basically what that's about is capturing water that currently is going through the system below the Shasta system, moving it across the valley, and then moving it down through Folsom. Folsom operates it's capacity challenged, and so the idea is you operate that in a kind of just-in-time way, moving water now that we would have to discharge when we don't need it into the delta, moving that into groundwater storage at a regional scale, and then pumping and using that water and running it down the American River system and into the delta when it is needed in terms of temperature or salinity requirements. And so it provides that additional water resource where it needs to be at the right time, and that's a benefit. And then the export service area, the idea of improving delta conditions, you can move water through the delta, or even without the delta conveyance, you can move it into Los Vaqueros and to other reservoirs south, the San Luis Reservoir, the Temperance, other reservoirs like that. And then on a longer term or longer duration be recharging those groundwater basins. And again, there's been kind of a policy question of why can't we just have all groundwater recharge type storage projects? You need both. You need surface to capture it when we're in the peaks, and then you need to be able to move it into storage when we're not in the peaks. And so that's how this system operates. So key conclusions, there is significant water available, even though there are those that have suggested in kind of a ideological or at a conceptual level that there's no more water to be had. We think we can manage water more effectively and more efficiently with an improved system, maybe that is designed to be managed in an integrated way, as opposed to kind of a system that we have now that has evolved at sort of a regional scale over time, and we've been trying to make it work as a system. But if we add storage strategically and then we operate it in an integrated way, we think we can generate significant additional water for all kinds of purposes. And then again, ecosystems, fish and wildlife are beneficiaries of this. Water supply, groundwater management are all beneficiaries. And then the idea that we're increasing resiliency and therefore we're able to kind of meet this challenge of climate change. And so just to speak directly to the question of did we model climate change, the answer is no, we didn't. The climate change modeling is pretty complex right now. Part of the response also is that these projects are going to have to do it on a project-by-project basis for this WISP money. And there's going to be a lot more work to be done, I guess, on this question of what types of scenarios to model under changed conditions in the future. But there are some principles and sort of some qualitative conclusions that we can, I think, make about the results of this study as it relates to climate. One of them, of course, is the biggest reservoir that we have in the state of California is shrinking, and it will be shrinking. It's just a question of how much. The other conclusion that's a little more difficult is that a lot of that water may or may not continue to fall into the system as rain and come through in flashier flows earlier in the winters, or in the middle of the winters. And so the question is, do we have a system that can opportunistically use that water, capture that water and use that water? And the answer, I think, is that we don't now, but we could. And so again, this storage and conveyance approach can provide us the tools we need to manage for those new challenges that we'll be facing. And then, of course, there are a bunch of other related questions about water quality and water management related to climate change that do need to be addressed and can be addressed, we think, on a project-by-project basis, and then also need to be part of this larger policy question about how much emphasis to put into surface storage and north of the delta, south of the delta, groundwater recharge, and so forth. But we think this study does demonstrate the fact that additional flexibility has its benefits. So I'm open for questions, and I look forward to interacting. And I will say that this is just intended as a kind of a down payment on a longer-term discussion. We are receiving a lot of comments, questions from our own members, as well as other folks that are just now kind of looking at this study. And of course, there are a lot of other, we recognize these other policy questions and projects that are going on. And so we're interested in joining that conversation in a productive way.
Mm-hmm. Dave, thanks for the relatively quick overview of a very important study.
I'd hope to do it quicker, but.
Well, I've had an opportunity to review it once before, and I commend you and Aqua for taking this on. MBK Engineering is a firm very familiar to us in the Delta, very highly regarded. So this is something that will obviously have a great utility. Any questions of Dave? Yes, Ken.
Probably not a surprise that I want to talk about this. You know, especially Dave, great report, and you know, just to follow on Randy's commendation to Aqua, it's really important for the water supply sector to really kind of take a lead and talk about this, because I don't think there's any single strategy that's more important than storage and accomplishing the co-equal goals. Because that, you know, you showed us a great example of variability. I mean, the only way to manage variability in a water system is with storage. And then when you put sigma on top of it, I mean, there's a lot of mean, what I get concerned about is just, there's a lot of benefits of storage, and how do you juggle all those things? And maybe the council remembers, sometime last year, we had DWR come in and talk about reoperation of the storage. And the answer for really what they came up to was it really was marginal. It was shifting some pools, and it became clear, I mean, it's been clear, but it really became clear that new storage is so essential, whether it's surface storage or groundwater storage, and you need more storage if we're going to balance all these things out, I think. And that's great and I was at that panel at Aqua where you had some of the project proponents, and that was just a great discussion. I think with the CSO amendment, and you're talking about it too, but I think we've sort of put on, an equal status, the need to operate it, to achieve the co-equal goals.
Yeah.
And then having enough water to put into storage, which is the conveyance piece, because and that's why storage is such a critical link in accomplishing both goals. And, you brought up the temperature control water. It's just so critical. And also, I think what we were looking for also was that there's commitments to operate these reservoirs in a way that achieves the co-equal goals. I mean, I guess I've been around so long. I remember there wasn't a whole lot of storage, but water suppliers looked at storage as, hey, I can get cheap water this year and buy less expensive water next year, and that doesn't work. And I think there's been an evolution in thinking that it's more about managing the resource, and I think that's why we didn't have much daylight between operations and storage and conveyance, and you really have to operate them all in conjunction to achieve these goals. So I hope that becomes part of the discussion, and Mr. Chair, whatever I think the council can do to kind of support these efforts and sort of how important storage is. I mean, I'm still amazed that there's actually opposition to storage. I'm not I'm not shocked, but it's just, I think the benefits are so clear and it's so integral to the solution that, I think, the more voices out there, the better, because we're not going to achieve the co-equal goals without more and robust storage, and storage that's operated in a way to manage the resource effectively. And so I was kind of glancing at the science action agenda, and I don't know if it was when Jeff Mount was in front of us, but I think, he was looking at doing some work on water supply reliability. And, this is, storage is key to that. And maybe that's an area of focus, or just kind of developing the concept a little bit more and the importance, and just so that we can have a fact-filled discussion on the attributes of storage and not make it kind of, well, it's a bad thing, or I don't want it here or there. So thank you. I'm glad you've elevated the discussion. Really appreciate Aqua taking a leadership role in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Others?
I just really wanted to quickly do an advertisement too. I forgot to do the fact that we did a piece that's a little easier to read than the 60-odd page technical document. We do have that on our website. There's a landing page in Aqua. You can just Google Aqua Storage Integration, and you'll go right to the landing page. And then on that landing page, there's the actual study itself and the link there. And it's got lots of good stuff. But then we also did a kind of an 8-page fold-out piece here that is a little bit more graphically rich, that tries to unpack some of these themes.
Susan?
Thanks, Dave. I agree with Ken. This is an excellent piece. Are of the projects listed on slide 6, are there certain projects that are keystone, meaning they should come online first to open the doorway to more flexibility in the future?
Well, thank you for that question. We've received that question actually from a number of different folks. We tried to roll this thing out with a couple of focus groups, and we had environmental community focus groups, and we had water management focus groups within Aqua that weren't part of the study, and others. And it's one of the questions that keeps coming up time and again, is which one, cut to the chase, which one's the best, and where are you going to, put your focus and your assets, and variations of that being, we only have so much money, only so much time, and so forth, and the reasons why we need to prioritize. And there's a serious answer, and then there's the joking answer. I'll say the joking answer first. These are all our children. None of them are better or smarter than the others. They're all equally important to us, and we love them all. And I say that jokingly, but in fact, that's how we tried to manage this project, is that we weren't doing this on purpose to try to sort, or identify or hone in, I guess, on how you could unpack, I guess, the different kinds of attributes of the different projects in order to identify optimal projects or optimal operations. So in fact, there's no technical part of the study that provides that answer, that in fact, various reviewers are going to find various reasons to promote various kinds of projects. And one of the things that Ken just kind of touched on or alluded to anyway is this idea that some people just really hate surface storage, period. Other people have kind of a different view of that, in that off-stream storage is okay, but on-stream storage is just to be hated. And again, we didn't try to get at, we have a project suite here that includes some on-stream projects in some parts of the state, and other off-stream projects in other parts of the state, and some existing projects that involve raising dams, at the margins, increasing the size of the reservoirs, and then other ones that involve conjunctive management and developing groundwater banks and so forth. And so, again, we wanted to focus on that diversity. We wanted to look at the value of the integration, but we purposefully, frankly, steered clear of trying to identify winners and losers or prioritizations. And we, I guess, are optimistic that the process that's going forward with the WISP, public benefits identification has a lot of elements in terms of the applications that come in that will be used to kind of sort through at least what the Water Commission thinks in the end is how California ought to think about investments in the public benefit side. Now, that being said, there are huge benefits, local and regional benefits of these projects, all of these projects, that would warrant them proceeding anyway, whether or not they get that particular part of that particular 2.7 billion. So it's a long answer to a very short and perceptive question, but I'm punting. That's the short answer.
Thanks, I guess what I wasn't driving toward choosing winners and losers and choosing one child over the other. I was thinking more along the lines of planning horizons and scenario analysis. So one scenario is existing delta conveyance, but somehow increasing flexibility and resiliency and improving water supply reliability while enhancing the ecosystem. So I was thinking, of these, which would contribute first? And so I'm thinking more along the lines of a phase or a stepped process toward the ultimate integration and resiliency and flexibility. Another scenario is improved through delta or dual conveyance, whatever the conveyance system that helps improve the entire system and allows operations to maximize benefits. And then another part of that equation is, among the regional projects, what additional conveyance would you need outside of the delta for, further integration and more efficiency. So I was thinking more along the lines of it would be really wonderful in a next step study to know which are the keystone projects that would lead to 3 or 4 phases to this ultimate grand plan of integration and resiliency.
Okay, well,
And I would like that.
okay.
By next year.
And we have by what date certain. I guess the tools that we used, the modeling approach and the approach we used here conceivably could be used for that sort of more focused analysis. And another similar thing that I had intended to talk about a little bit is that as we looked at the results of this particular study, one of the things that jumped out was the 400,000 acre feet of groundwater recharge, which was a more modest number, I guess, than we had hoped for and potentially expected. And there was a sense that, and of course with conveyance that goes up to, almost 1 million, which is a fair bit of water still, but it's not like the overdraft situation by any means. And so the question is there another way of looking at a suite of projects, maybe not this suite of projects, maybe other projects or conceptual projects that would be more designed toward focusing on particularly the groundwater demands, I guess, in different parts of the state, particularly south of the Delta, and could we work backwards instead of working from a suite of projects and kind of running them and seeing what they do, turn around and say, what do we need to have done, and what could we build that would deliver on that? And it might involve conveyance as well, minor, or not minor, but regional like conveyance. So for instance, strengthening east to west conveyance capabilities south of the Delta, which weren't included in this at all, or other types of solutions that we haven't thought about. So we are looking at that. I do have actually another work group that I'm working with within Aqua to talk more specifically about the groundwater challenge and potential add-on work or additional work that we could do that would focus on that challenge and kind of working it backwards from the problem back to the solutions. And so I'd be happy to talk with you offline about other things that we might be able to look at.
You'll have a good indicator when the groundwater sustainability plans are developed, because within each watershed, each region, they're going to identify surface water sources and groundwater recharge potential. And, conveyance may not be anything more than a 30-inch poured-in-place pipeline, but it's going to be necessary to move from surface to groundwater.
Yeah, in the vein of asking for things that we'd maybe like to see, but not asking Dave.
Dave hasn't he hasn't connected the request with a need to fund it, so be careful what you ask for.
That'll be an offline communication.
Yes. I'm kind of back to the science action agenda and really, because of the critical role storage plays in balancing both co-equal goals, what can we do to further this discussion? And is it sort of looking at, more refinements on the benefits from storage or what kind of storage? How can you put together sort of where storage should go and how it should be operated, sort of following up on the CSO amendment by doing something. And I don't, this is my second year of budget here, and I'm still not clear how all that works, but I guess, I'm going to ask that this seems to be a priority, especially in light of the CSO amendment, and what can we do to further the discussion on storage and highlight its importance, because we've certainly made a policy decision that says it's integral to the co-equal goals. And so there should be, we can add to the discussion about, fact-based benefits and issues and how can it help environmental water and water supply reliability. It just seems storage is in the middle of it. So although I'm not suggesting we fund Aqua's work, but I'm saying is there something we can do? Can the science program be involved? Was there discussion about involving the ISB? Just, integrating, if we've got multiple stakeholders that are interested in what we're advocating, it seems like, we should join that effort. So that's my request, is that we think about putting that on the science agenda and seeing how can we contribute to this discussion on the importance of storage and how to look at storage.
All right, anyone else? Yes, Cliff.
Yeah, let me answer, just at least make a partial answer to what you just mentioned. One of the things that the Independent Science Board did in their recent meeting was to come up with a list of things that they wanted to do reviews on, and water supply reliability is high on their list. And certainly there are things in the science action agenda that would address some of the more specific science and engineering questions. I actually, if you don't mind, would like to ask Dave a question from my perspective as a New Mexican who's been around the discussion on storage for the last couple decades. I have a
By all
question.
means.
Thank you. Dave, question that often comes up in discussing storage in the area that I come from is the issue of how much should be surface storage, how much should be groundwater storage. For surface storage, where should we put these kinds of systems? And in particular, the issue that I don't hear much about here in California, but I hear a lot about it in New Mexico and Arizona, and that is how much do these various systems are going to cost us from an evaporation perspective. So we had a famous hydrologist in New Mexico who used to say, yes, our low elevation reservoirs is where we spread out our water to dry. And so this is a concept that I think, I'm curious whether your studies have actually modeled, depending on where the location is, the elevation, the depth, and things like that, what some of the evaporative losses of some of these various storage options are.
Yeah, I guess the short answer is, again, we didn't get quantitative or that can't be unpacked necessarily from this particular study, but that issue did come up. There are different configurations and locations. Obviously, one of the projects that we looked at in the Tulare Lake Basin is quite shallow. The Tulare Lake Basin, the idea is to kind of put a berm around the existing lake bottom, which has pretty impervious clay bottom, and then the idea is using that as a reservoir in order to move that water then into groundwater. And I am aware of the fact that one of the, I guess, conclusions of some of the analysis was a significant amount of that water would be evaporated. So we didn't do a comparison, I guess, or a kind of a geographic analytical approach to that. Again, it wasn't the question we were trying to solve with this particular study, but certainly that would be an important consideration. Again, kind of the counter answer to that is that sometimes, in fact, in order to get water into groundwater, you do need this surface capture, and the location of that is important as well. And so it may be that there's collateral losses of, based on evaporation that are kind of the price you pay for capturing the water where you need to recharge it. So
I think these are nice examples of science issues that would well be worth studying in more detail. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one request for a public request to address the council from Greg Zlotnick. No need. All right. Good to see you, Greg. Thanks. All right, I think that concludes this item. Dave, thank you very much. Give our best to Tim Quinn
I will.
as he's
Thank you.
recovering.
He's on the mend. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good.
Thanks.
All right, thanks for the good work. Anthony, thank you. Next item, file item 10, Delta Conservation Framework Update. I see the presenters are in the audience. Jessica?
I'll simply invite up Terry Gaines from our staff to introduce the panel. I'm here to talk about the Delta Conservation Framework.
Good afternoon. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our agency partners from the Department of Fish and Wildlife who are here to give you an update on the Delta Conservation Framework. Joining us today to provide this update are Carl Wilcox, who's the policy advisor to the director for the Delta, Brooke Jacobs, and Christina Sloop. As you may recall, this team was here back in September of 2016 to provide an initial update on the development of the framework. And since then, Department of Fish and Wildlife has held a series of public workshops and has been further developing this document. Council staff participated and helped facilitate these workshops. The framework was recently released to agency partners for an initial internal review. I guess it was an external review, but an initial partner review. And council staff provided comments on this initial draft, and we participated in a meeting last week along with the other agency partners. And we look forward to continued dialogue with the department as they finalize the Delta Conservation Framework. In fact, we have a meeting next Monday morning to go over our comments in detail. Council staff expects to use the framework to aid in the development of the proposed Delta Plan Ecosystem Restoration Amendment. Over the coming months, council staff intends to collaborate with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, other planning partners, and targeted stakeholders to inform and develop the Ecosystem Restoration Amendment to the Delta Plan. We're currently working on an outreach strategy and will be holding our first listening session next month. Council staff expect to be back later this year with a more detailed presentation on the Ecosystem Amendment itself. And at this point, I'd like to turn the mic over to the panel to present the Delta Conservation Framework, and I'm sure they will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Terry. Chairman Fiorini, council members, it's a pleasure to be here to give you an update on where we are with this project. Originally, we had a really ambitious objective of having it done last winter. But because of the level of input that we have received, particularly in the Delta community in formulation, the plan, we decided to extend the process to make sure that we incorporated as much of that input into the framework as possible. And this is a milestone that we've reached in that we have a public draft that we're ready to release here shortly. And we'll describe the timelines for that. As part of that, Terry indicated that we've been doing work with our partners, and we're going to continue to work with the partners that have helped kind of steer the development of the framework, but also undertake a couple more workshops in the Delta to take input there. So this is a major step for us, and we appreciate the amount of participation and collaboration from the various agency staff, and particularly the staff of the Stewardship Council. With that, I'm going to step out of the way and let the preparers of this document go through it with you and brief you on it. They put in a tremendous amount of effort into this product, and I think we've got a really good start on something here and look forward to bringing it to fruition. Thank you. Farther up.
All right, there we go. Got the mic figured out. Thank you also for having us here, and thanks Carl and Terry for that introduction. As Terry and Carl mentioned, we developed the framework from the start within close collaboration with other agency partners. That includes the Resources Agency and Eco Restore, the Department of Water Resources. Of course, the Delta Stewardship Council staff and science program staff were integral members of those early development teams and throughout the workshops, and also the Delta Conservancy. So as a reminder, we were here almost a year ago. We conducted a series of 6 public workshops from July through December of last year, and we used those workshops to develop the core components of the framework. So they were essentially written, commented on, and developed during the course of those workshops. That includes the vision, purpose, principles, goals, and objectives, which Christina will touch on in a minute. And we've woven input from those workshops throughout the public draft that will be released very soon. So that input and collaboration really forms the basis for the document. It's pretty exciting. Throughout the workshop process and after the workshops, we also met with other entities that requested meetings with us. They wanted to submit their input or comments, including the 5-County Coalition and several individual Delta landowners. So we really look forward to getting your feedback. We plan to release the public draft very soon for a protracted, at least 45-day comment period. And Christina's going to talk a little bit more about what's in the document and what we've been doing since the workshops ended.
Well, thank you very much to the council for having us back to give you all an update of where we've taken all this, and we're very excited to be able to release the document now for public review, which no doubt will, expand the document even further. I do think that we've hit all the main points that we've received throughout our workshops and the following process of actually informing the Delta community and agencies on the process. But I'd like to take you through a little bit of just an overview of the timeline that we're thinking about, as well as give you an overview of how we've structured the document and the main sections and their topics, and how we have integrated the feedback that we have gotten into a series of overarching goals and related strategies for implementation, and even suggested objectives that have, smartness around them, meaning that they are specific and measurable and, what does it say, achievable and realistic and time-bound. So this means that in essence, the framework is not a plan, and we are, really hoping that everyone understands that. It is a framework, a long-term framework that takes a lot of the information that is already out there in the Delta science realm, as well as planning realm, as well as needs of the Delta community, and we're pulling this all together in this framework, and it is very high level. And so the way we are proposing that the framework is going to be implemented is through regional partnerships that in some cases already exist, and I will give you more detail in my presentation around that. And that will basically invite all interested stakeholders to the table. So in some ways, this is a new approach. Hopefully, it will be realizable and will end up being a means to building trust among stakeholders. And hopefully that will mean that we can then look towards the overarching goals that the framework provides and, take those down to the regional level and look at a specific region of the Delta and implement them. Not forgetting that at the landscape scale, this all needs to mesh together as well. So I'll give you more details as I go on. The timeline is as follows. So for the last 6 or so months, we have worked on pulling together the document itself, but we've also still kept our little finger in participating in emerging partnership efforts, just like the ones that I've just described, mainly led by the Delta Conservancy, where, for example, in the Cache Slough, a number of stakeholders came together to start phase 1, as it was called, to look at the possibilities in the Cache Slough region in terms of, water management, conservation, implementation, as well as agriculture, and just really trying to test casing this approach. And so it was a really wonderful opportunity to see whether this might be possible. Then we had a couple of months of internal review, and as Carl and Brooke alluded to, we are going to release the public draft within the next few weeks, early September most likely, followed by a 45-day at minimum public review period. And so we will then also give these additional presentations and workshops, as Carl mentioned. And then we hope to have the final document ready for release by the end of the year. So just to remind you of the purpose again, so the framework is a forum, hopefully, for continued collaborative engagement and broad buy-in into a process for realizing conservation in the Delta going forward. So some of the goals and strategies are really focused towards that. So we need to keep talking to each other. It provides a shared vision that was developed through the workshop input by the stakeholders and a series of these overarching goals, like I mentioned. And so this is all the outcome of us really thinking up the potential solutions to challenges that we all know about in the Delta. And so these, all this information, as I mentioned, is to inform these regional conservation strategies that are to be hopefully considered by these regional partnerships. It is also to serve as the long-term extension of California Eco-Restore, which is basically a 5-year framework for implementation. And so the Delta Conservation Framework really aims up to 2050 and even beyond. We also want to tie in directly with state funding priorities to make sure that the goals and strategies that are suggested are funded. And then, as Terry mentioned, we would like this document to really serve as one of the main basic documents to base the amendment of the ecosystem elements of the Delta Plan on. And yes, we have been working with council staff and are continuing to in this regard. So the document is outlined in 6 sections. It's also got an executive summary, which is sort of the short and sweet overview of the main basic points. And so the 6 sections are basically focused on, number 1, section 1 is an outline of the common vision, the purpose, the guiding principles, and sort of the background on why this framework was developed. And then the second section really focuses on building community around conservation and integrating the Delta community into this process more effectively. The third section is focused on improving Delta ecosystem function and services. So this is based on the SFEI publication, Delta Renewed, that I believe you are familiar with. And so we are really basing the main tools and concepts that are outlined in this publication as underlying elements for the goals that were developed around that. Then the section 4 is really to highlight and focus on the important role that the Delta science plays in this, and the increasing capacity of the Delta science programs, and to really help coordinate those so that all these elements that we are proposing to basically merging the socioeconomic aspects with the ecological aspects and moving forward sort of the entire picture of delta conservation. And then Section 6 is just an overview of how we envision the implementation, and I already outlined that, in the context of these regional conservation partnerships. We also have about 15 appendices, so there's a lot of detail available for, really digging in if you so choose. So we hope that, this tiered approach with a really short and sweet executive summary, a little meatier document itself, which is, I think each section is around 20 pages, but it has pictures and little boxes, so it should be nice to read it. And then, the appendices as well to look into. And, of course, it's reflects all this wealth of information that's out there in terms of scientific literature and other planning documents of the Delta. So I want to just move forward and share with you the common vision that the Delta stakeholders came up with together. So we are looking towards 2050, where the Delta is composed of resilient natural and managed ecosystems that are situated within a mosaic, a landscape scale mosaic of towns and agricultural landscapes, where people prosper and healthy wildlife communities thrive. And by conservation, we mean not just restoration, but also enhancement of ecosystems and the protection, and of course, adaptive management as we go forward, because again, this is a long-term framework. And this is a means to achieving really system-wide multi-benefits. So again, integrating all the various facets of the Delta and reconciling conservation with, for example, the processes of the entire watershed, agriculture, community, flood protection, recreation, and climate adaptation, and so forth. Guiding principles that the framework is based on include basically considering people in place, building community and engaging in public education and outreach, promoting in the ecosystem conservation context mainly ecosystem function that then also will provide benefits for listed species. Ecosystem services, because humans also benefit from a healthier Delta ecosystem. And then also, really a focus on multiple benefits, which doesn't necessarily mean it has to happen with every single project, but from a landscape perspective, it would, fall into this mosaic approach where we can integrate wildlife-friendly agriculture, for example, into this larger picture. Making decisions grounded in science is very important. Realizing mechanisms for increased efficiency in the context of permitting and also funding, and really acknowledging the funding needs long-term, because most of these conservation lands are not necessarily easy to maintain over the long term, especially when it comes to levee maintenance and so forth. So, Section 2, as I mentioned, is focused on integrating the Delta community with conservation. And so we have 3 goals there. Mainly, first one, Goal A, is focused on integrating the Delta community stakeholders and their needs into the planning of conservation so that they're at the table, or at least have representatives at the table. Engaging in public education about the Delta is Goal B, and this is to happen not just locally, but all across the state, so Californians really learn more about why the Delta is important, and also at the national level. And there are already many of these initiatives that are going towards this, so we're trying to promote those into the future. And then Goal C is focused on implementing multi-benefit focused conservation and management, as I mentioned, and that ties in with flood management and agriculture, wildlife-friendly agriculture, and subsidence reversal, and so forth. So all of these goals have various strategies attached to them with more specific objectives. And these will be outlined in each of these sections in detail, and there will also be a summary of all of them available in the executive summary. As I mentioned, the section on ecosystem function and services improvement is based on a Delta Renewed. And so the goal that is attached to that, I think, has the most strategies. It has like 7. And it's focused on really moving forward this idea of promoting ecosystem processes so that we can recreate a healthier ecosystem in the larger landscape scale perspective. Project to project is not really cutting it anymore. So we're, again, thinking about this landscape scale mosaic where we're thinking about how things work together and, in terms of connectivity and how species move and how we can, benefit the whole system. The section 4, as I mentioned, is focused on the Delta science and how important it is to really base our conservation efforts in science. And it outlines the current capacity of Delta science, which is really a wonderful thing to base this on. And Goal E focuses on evaluating progress of any type of conservation that we do, as well as address climate change stressors and other drivers by the Delta Science Program and Interagency Ecological Program. Thank you. It's IEP. The science strategies and their, emerging, I think, coordinated adaptive management programs. So this is a key point, that all these efforts are better coordinated, and that is what the framework lays out as well. Then the facilitating the Delta conservation processes has 2 goals, and this is mainly focused on the capacity for improving our permitting processes and making that more clearly accessible to folks that are the conservation practitioners that need to get these permits to actually put the projects on the ground. And then also really to put ahead and forward this real need about long-term funding for the continued conservation implementation and management. And this slide, I apologize, it's probably a little hard to see and it's kind of complex, but it's again just to outline the idea that regional partnerships could really be the entities that move this framework forward and implement the goals and strategies. And I just wanted to point out that, this is kind of already going on. The Suisun Marsh Plan is one of the examples that's already implementing their, outlined goals in their Suisun Marsh Plan. And then, for example, in the Yolo Bypass, there are several types of partnerships, and the little diagram on the left kind of outlines how they fit together from a grassroots level up to the state, federal, local policy level, and in the middle is the local agency level. And so as long as we make sure that all these partnerships are talking to each other, I think then their work could be much improved, and I think they already do. I already mentioned the cash slew, and I also wanted to point to the Central Delta Corridor Partnership, which is a new partnership that's emerging in this context, where landowners came to the table and started talking to each other around, how can we coordinate conservation projects in this Central Delta area. And this diagram just again shows that the conservation framework is very high level, and that the idea is that these regional conservation strategies come together, in their regional contexts and look towards the overarching goals and strategies and then see how they fit in with their regional contexts. So we have North Delta, Yolo Bypass, Cache Slough, Central Delta Corridor, South Delta, and Suisun Marsh as what we call the Delta Conservation Opportunity Regions. And so there are short descriptions in one of the appendices of each of these regions where we kind of outline sort of the planning history and the context, so to speak, the lay of the land and what the opportunities may be, who the players are, and so forth. So we hope that these will serve these regional partnerships to kind of start a conversation if they're not already talking. So it's kind of a tool. In terms of next steps, we are definitely going to work with council staff on the Delta Plan Chapter 4 amendment. And we will continue our involvement with the currently emerging regional conservation strategies led by the Delta Conservancy. And then we're also continuing to work, especially with the Proposition 1 bond funds that are administered through the Delta Conservancy, the Delta Science Program, I believe, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And potential next steps include that we could, really think more about how to implement the long-term continuation of eco-restore, as well as how to talk with locals and NGOs on the implementation of some of the outlined goals and objectives, and also better coordinate among state and federal agency to discuss the permitting of restoration projects in the Delta. And this is all I have. So thank you, and we would be happy to address some of your questions.
Great. Questions? Patrick?
Thanks. It's a lot of work, and I know you went to a lot of public hearings and took a lot of input. At the Walnut Grove public session, I recall some pushback from some local Delta residents on the issue of ecosystem projects on private land, and some argument made that those should only occur on public lands. And you described regional projects, and there was some skepticism, and I remember, Carl, you explained the potential at Paradise Cut, for instance, on the lower San Joaquin, where flood protection's at issue, but ecosystem improvements are an opportunity. And that was a good example of something more that could be done. And a lot of what you've described seems aspirational. We're going to have a forum, everybody's going to get together, people are going to come first, but we're going to protect the environment, and we're going to assure, water deliveries, which is understated, not really emphasized, but nevertheless is part of the state's obligation and co-equal goal. So, what do you say about that specific issue? Does anybody have a veto, or have you put any cuffs on the state's ability to do an ecosystem project that would link up disparate habitat areas, for instance, because you might have to buy up private land or create easements or, God forbid, even have eminent domain?
Well, to that point, I don't think in the construct of the framework that we have put handcuffs on the state. We have identified the focus on using existing public lands as they are appropriate for the purposes of ecosystem restoration. There's quite a bit of public land in the Delta. Much of it is land that is owned by, in the Central Delta, West Delta, which is deeply subsided, and for restoring function and service doesn't lend itself very well to that. There are other lands in Suisun, in the lower Yolo Bypass, that are publicly owned that would be targeted for this kind of activity. But there are the needs of the, particularly under the biological opinions and RCs authorizations, to create new habitat that's not focused on public lands. Because, there isn't a lot of public land that meets the specifications for that restoration. I think the objective through the regional conservation strategy development is to have discussions around those and identify opportunities that fit in with the needs of the local community, whether it's the county, flood control, the agricultural community. I think one of the things that we have learned is that, some private landowners decide that it's in their interests to sell their property for these kinds of projects. And, then it's like, how do you manage that? And I think part of the focus goes to how it integrates with the economics of the area and understanding that. I think that's something that we've spent a lot of time in the cash slew effort. A lot of time's been spent on that in the Yola bypass discussions on enhancement there for fisheries. And how do you balance those needs and minimize the effects of your management actions on the local community and the local economy? And I think that's where a lot of the resistance lies, as well as kind of the issues around assurances, and what kind of assurances are people looking for. I think one of the things, and this is my perspective on kind of where we've come with cash, is that there's an underlying concern about the North Delta, or North Bay Aqueduct, and the intakes being in cash slew. The intakes being in cash slew is just like the intakes being in the South Delta. They're in a really bad place. Restoration there isn't going to exacerbate their permitting issues because they already have a permit to operate and criteria. They may have water quality effects on the water that's diverted by potentially increasing carbon. But probably the best thing as part of a strategy there is to look at how you move that diversion point to someplace where it's a better diversion point, delivers better water, and is less of an issue for long-term sustainability. So I think those are the kinds of discussions that need to occur in these regional contexts, and the framework would provide kind of an overarching context for having that conversation. I don't know if I got your answer.
No, it is good. I mean, your approach and your devotion to this, the three of you and the others behind this, is essential, and over time it's, I think, very important to the Delta people and interests that you have that. But eco-restore, just like the water fix, once we're part of a bigger project that has now been divided. So in the one that the in Delta people almost universally hate, the tunnels, right? The state's view is, well, we're going to keep trying to do it, but we're going to try and get cooperation and mitigate as much as possible, and we're going to help you. See, mitigation is important to that if that project went ahead, but certainly Delta's place matters. But if that project, or even without that project, the ecosystem co-equal goal, you've laid out a horizon to 2050, so that's more than 30 years. And a couple things. One is you referenced that you're going to point out that it's going to take money to do that. Well, if WaterFix goes ahead, and that's unknown, but if it goes ahead in any form, whatever form it might go ahead, it's going to be around for way past 2050. So the Brown administration and the Department of Fish and Wildlife's commitment and the other agencies, Natural Resources and everybody else, to ecosystem improvements in the next 5 years is really good, and it's good to have an emphasis and to get projects moving and all the things you discussed. I hope that the document deals realistically and pointedly with how you get the next 30 years. Because otherwise, those who question on environmental grounds water fix are right to be concerned that an aspirational document or framework is insufficient to be sure that water exports will not result in the degradation of the Delta environment. So you can't speak for future anybody's, but certainly in your document, hopefully you can hold us all to what the questions are that have to be answered. And they're questions that we should face as the council in looking at both elements of the state's intended policy, which is ecosystem that you've talked about, and water reliability that DWR talks about.
I think that's a really good point. I think we have focused on staying away from, with the framework, with issues around water. So it's primarily ecosystem, the conservation of the ecological aspects of the Delta in the context of the Delta as place. And the idea we have an expectation that restoration of ecosystem function and service is going to benefit the Delta irrespective of what necessarily the outflow condition is. And that's totally up in the air at this point relative to water fix or what the water board may do or what any number of processes may do. But we do have a pretty good idea that, or expectation that these habitat restoration actions are going to provide benefit both to the aquatic ecosystem of the Delta, but also in addressing issues around subsidence reversal and providing habitat benefits associated with that, with potential long-term restoration of some of those features. And I think as those are implemented, and we're just getting to the implementation, actually getting projects in the ground as part of Eco-Restore, we're going to start to learn how those operate and what the benefits are associated with them. And my sense is that as we learn, and depending on what we learn, we will want to do more or we might want to do less based on how they function and what services they provide to the Delta ecosystem in addressing particularly the benefits for the species that we're concerned about and those that affect particularly water operations. And my sense is that dealing in both arenas, that if these are providing benefits to species, then there's an incentive, particularly on the water user community side, to invest in doing more of it. Much of what's being implemented, a lot of it's happening in Sassoon Marsh because there's a plan in place and there's a recognition that there's a quid pro quo going on there where the managers in the marsh have received streamlined permitting and regional permitting so that they can do their maintenance operations and manage their wetlands in exchange for basically the not resisting tidal habitat restoration in that marsh and for the purposes of recovery, not just of fish species, but a number of other species that are found in that area. So, with that, the primary implementing mechanism for that restoration is eco-restore or the mitigation obligations of the projects, but also, it's situations that arise out of willing sellers who see a benefit in using their land for restoration purposes from an economic standpoint. And so that, that's kind of the dialogue and dance that needs to go on. And, I spent a good deal of time in Sassoon in the early days of formulating that plan and the process under which it was developed and is now being implemented. So I see that as kind of the model. Economics drives much of what goes on, and as much as we want to control or land use, private landowners, in a willing seller situation may make decisions about how they want to use their land, and then it's a question of how you restrain that or don't restrain it. And I know that's a big issue for local government. And so it's how you manage that and address those kinds of issues that come along with that.
Skip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Carl and Christina and Brooke, thank you for a good report. A couple comments to your points about willing seller, willing buyer. Yeah, it does create problems for those that want to farm and that their farming operation is around some sort of ecological restoration project. It's just a problem, obviously. You know it. Many of us do. The other issue about the MBA, we recognize that there's going to be, eco-restore projects around it, and we're prepared to look at solutions to it. And it's more than just water quality. It's about, there are limitations on our pumping when certain conditions are in play. And so we're hoping that we'll see $500 million worth of assistance from the state one of these days. But I want to talk about the report itself. And as Christina, you mentioned early on about trust. Over the last several years that I've been involved in different sorts of operations that the state is conducting in the Delta, the locals have been left out. But throughout your report, and let me just hit on a couple of the words that struck, collaborative engagement, shared vision, consider people in place, integrated stakeholder. These are the sorts of things that I, as a local elected official, are looking for when it comes to dealing with the state and federal government. And my staff has shared with me that this process has been a good one, and it's because I think the individuals involved, but there's an attitude that we need to include the locals. We need to find out. And oftentimes, I've said it up here, is those of us at diocese think we know best. We're government, we're here to help. Sometimes we're not so helpful. And so I'm glad to hear that you're continuing to reach out to the community, holding public hearings, because I think that's the way you're going to make the project a good project, because you're going to have local involvement and support. So anyway, I wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Piggybacking on Skip's comments, under the purpose headings, you identify potential solutions to recognized challenges. Identify some challenges that you've found unanimity around that would help us to develop problem statements as we begin to pursue Chapter 4 ecosystem amendments in the Delta Plan.
Yes, I would be happy to. Well, one was just mentioned, which is basically, bringing people into the conversation and into the planning. By people, I mean, the community. And another one is in terms of the implementation of projects, focused on permitting. Another one has to do with, the focus on and, regulations around listed species only without really considering the larger context, the landscape scale context. So these are just 3 examples. If you can think of others, please help me out. But those are important ones. And we're addressing them all. Same with flood protection. How can we integrate? And so the main focus of the framework is really, and I guess the main word is integration, is bringing it all together and trying to see if we can make progress by having everyone, all the various players, all the various interests come to the table and see how far we can get with that approach. And there are ways to do this in a way that it's, facilitated in economic context as well as the ecological context. And so really, bringing all the things that people care about to the table.
Well, as an example, did you find unanimity that in the workshops that you conducted that the habitat is too dispersed and lacks interconnection?
Yes.
That was pretty universal.
And so I think the proposed solution for that was to really think of the delta in the context of this mosaic. I mean, we're not going to go back to the delta as it was, 250 years ago. It is going to be what it is currently, mainly agricultural land. And that is fine. It's just we have opportunities to maybe stitch together. And I mentioned the Central Delta Partnership, Corridor Partnership. And it's basically landowners coming to the table, privately. It wasn't official until just recently, that are willing to play together, so to speak. And, they are putting ideas forward, and there's no decisions made at this point, but it's a good sign. And so it's this kind of thing that the framework is really promoting, is come to the table. There are hard questions. We know, we've heard them. I mean, in these meetings last year, in these workshops, we had the community come out, and there was a lot of frustration. And I mean, I certainly felt that. And maybe there is not always the perfect solution for everything right, available at the top of the, game, but at the same time, as long as we listen to each other, we can understand each other better. One of the biggest things that I benefited from participating in this process in Cache Slough that I mentioned was to learn more about the realities of agriculture as a state employee. And it was just like, oh, okay, well, that's something we need to consider more. And, how can we, I mean, maybe it's just my personal way to, try to move everybody forward and find real solutions that can actually be implemented. But I think that is the main message that the framework really promotes is collaboration and trying it out. I mean, if it works, we'll see. But, that's maybe the aspirational aspect of it. But I'd like to think of it as maybe a little bit of a paradigm shift in how things have been approached. And, if we're all in our silos and we're trying to steer something from up here that nobody listens to down there, it's not going to work. Or the other way around. So
just to follow up on that, I think as part of this Central Delta corridor effort, that is an extensive effort of basically quasi and public property owners in that area, starting to talk about how you could manage those lands, both for agriculture, for wildlife benefits, for restoration benefits, and broader conservation benefits. And as part of that conversation, you find out that, well, we're having a really tough time even managing this part of our property for ag because it's gotten so low, the groundwater table's too high, and we need to start thinking about doing something else there. But then that gets into how that change in land use affects existing wildlife use in particular, but also, kind of agriculture. But if it can't be farmed for agriculture anymore, then, how do you use it for something that contributes to longer-term sustainability and, from a flood control or subsidence reversal or climate adaptation perspective or altered habitat benefits? So I think those are the, until you start having those conversations, that's the kind of conversation that got the Paradise Cut efforts down in the South Delta going. Was the interest in improved flood, and the flood kind of drives it, and the local interest in the flood improvements, but there are also habitat benefits that come along with it. So I think unless you can have those conversations, you can't really get to those points of kind of shared understanding and problem identification and solution formulation.
I agree. Anything else? Susan.
Thank you for all the hard work you're doing on this framework. It's probably been quite the year for you. So earlier you mentioned that in an appendix, the regional efforts would be described in more detail. And I'm wondering if in each regional description, there will be a section about how a particular regional effort ties back to the goals and strategies and principles in the framework, which do they further, the benefits achieved, the time horizon, et cetera. And I think that sheet up front on each of these regional project descriptions would really inform our effort to amend the ecosystem portion of the Delta Plan.
That is a really, really good suggestion. Right now, what we have in there is more a general description of how it ties back to the, more overarching context. But perhaps as we move forward with council staff on how that would integrate, I will have more information that is more specific to that. And I also wanted to mention that the Delta Conservation Framework is intended as a living document, so we are, putting it up online and then hope to be able to update it every 5 or so years. I think it's 5, yeah. So that, new developments can be integrated and things can be updated as we, work towards more information and solutions.
Very good. We'll look forward to working with you further. And Brooke, Christina, Carl, thank you very much for all the work you've put into it thus far, for coming and presenting today. And that concludes file item number 10. Any public comment requests? File item number 11, any public comment requests for anything? Hearing none. The next meeting will be September 28th. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.